Back at it with another one. So, do you remember back in 2016, 2017, I think, somewhere around there, when there was the really crazy clown craze, mostly in the US, but I think a couple of the countries too, where people were basically kind of just dressed up as clowns with weapons and stuff, and they would just stand out in like roads and highways and things, just kind of intimidating people, but nothing really happened. Yeah, so this is a story that we're about to read. It's not very long. It's a nice short story, very sweet, pretty well, not sweet, pretty scary. About somebody's actual experience with one. So yeah, I thought we'd just kind of check that out. Enjoy. The clowns in 2016 almost killed me. Before I begin, I want to put down some basic facts about my story. I was 13 at the time of this occurrence, and had been reading creepypastas and true stories since I was 11. Bad habits. I live in Carroll Island, a place where you can find a good amount of forestry everywhere. This was located in Baltimore County, and I loved hearing Goatman stories about this place. I believe there is one in Carroll Island, but that's not the point. I loved this bit of forestry, and had always when I was a child. I had lived in this house, still am, since I was 7, 8 years old. These forests, like any other town, always had some urban legend behind them. Some of these were mostly told by older kids who were just trying to scare the kids who would wander about the streets. The teens would always go into the woods to smoke pot, alcohol. I hated that, but it's how they got their kicks. Story starts. Sorry. I was outside of my house, sometime near January on a full moon. Can't recall which month perfectly, just know it was a full moon. This was when some of the clown things were starting to die off and come back in April 2017. I never believed in them, and still don't, but that night, I think I did. I walked inside my house with me, my brother, and my friend, who we'll call Kyle. Kyle was from Dominican Republic and had always believed in the paranormal, so we had a good bit in common. We walked in my brother's room, since it was the largest, and we were watching Logan Paul's controversial video. Once it was done, Kyle remembered it was a full moon, and that the clowns were out tonight. I called bullshit, and told him it was all hoaxes, and insane people on highways. He doubled me by saying that if I didn't believe, they'd get me. I laughed at his remark to that, and told him to stop believing all that stuff. That's when my brother, who I'll call Josh, sat up and said that I was just a pussy. I told him he was a jerk, and that it wasn't funny. We got into a conversation for a good 10 minutes, when Kyle finally says, "Then why don't you go prove it?" I said, "Okay," and told him that I would be back. I know just the place to prove it. There was a little place down the road that was put there for a park, essentially. It wasn't funded, the only thing it had was a small walk bridge that was pretty nice. We called it the Duck Pond, but it actually was Seneca Creek. I'm giving all the location details to give you a better understanding of how scary this place would have been at night. I left the house, got onto my bike, and rode off 2 blocks away. At the entrance of the park is another set of woods that is private property, for houses on the water and some abandoned houses inside. The entrance is easy to see, can't miss it, and personally, it looks pretty. As I was walking up to the entrance, I noticed a foul odor. Keep in mind that this is wildlife, where things die and decompose right there. It wasn't helped with the stench of trash reeking from the trash island. I was about to walk into the park when, I shit you not, something had spoken in a low, somewhat luring voice. "Hey there, kiddo. Why don't you come over here?" This is when I went into fucking panic mode. I'm someone who isn't scared off so easily, but it was the thought that it could be someone out there, the unknown, which scared me. I turned towards a small patch of bushes near the entrance, and I see something crouched over deep in the bushes facing me. I couldn't tell if it was a clown or demon. I didn't fucking care at this point. Even thinking about it is making me paranoid. As I was gonna man up and go see what it was, it speaks again. "That's right. Come over here." And I hear a sheathing of a blade. That's when I knew it was time to book it. I instantly wailed out in fright, almost pissing myself, and crashed into that bike. I say, if I hadn't been riding for many years and built up muscle of power out of there, I would have been done. I floor it back to my house. At this point, my body is in complete hysteria, and Kyle said that once I opened the door, I was not comprehensible. It took me a minute to calm down and realize I shouldn't be so scared. I explained to Kyle and Josh what had just happened. and we agreed to go back tomorrow and fuck up whoever was there. We never did, and I never go there at night. Creepy man in the fucking bushes, whoever you are, if you're still out there, let's not meet again. This is a true story. I'm an upcoming story writer and thought I'd put down a real one first. Thank you for reading. And that was a story by Scary Video Reviews YT over on Reddit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye. I was sent a video of something I thought I dreamed as a child. This is a story that I've never shared with anyone, and to be honest, I'm scared shitless to tell it. All I ask is for you to please be understanding. I know what I did was stupid and dangerous, and I could have gotten myself killed. I get it. I didn't die, but I think something even worse might have happened. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the internet could be a profoundly creepy and fucked up place. But when I was growing up, it was still a relatively novel experience. My mom discovered that if she handed me her shiny new iPad, I would immediately stop blabbering about whatever grade 3 drama was going on in my head, and instead would sit silently, perfectly entertained, for hours and hours on end. I was probably one of the first iPad kids, something I feel pretty gross about looking back. After a few months of mainlining every YouTube video I could find, I decided I was going to make my own channel, in the hopes of becoming one of the proto-YouTube stars that had just started being a thing. As you can probably imagine, my content was shit. I recorded dozens and dozens of short movies with my stuffed animals and plastic horses, making up stories and doing all their voices, filming with the iPad's built-in camera in glorious 720p. Think barely comprehensible storylines delivered by a girl who very clearly needed a speech therapist. Most of my videos had exactly one view on them, or two if I showed my mom. Thinking back on it, I don't think she realized I was actually sharing stuff publicly on the internet, because she never responded with anything more than mild amusement. One of my favorite toys was my Cheer Bear stuffy. It's the pink Care Bear you've probably seen if you ever watched the cartoons. Her whole personality is being cheerful, so naturally I'd cast her as the tortured hero who was orphaned or kidnapped or left for dead or whatever wildly dramatic situation my weird little brain could dream up. I started to notice that the videos that I made with Cheer Bear were getting more views than the others. Nothing crazy, but like 5 or 6. Huge numbers to me. I'd tirelessly been putting out these one-view epics for the better part of the school year, so I was really happy to see other people might be watching. Then one night, everything changed. I got my very first subscriber. The user was named CheerBear2007 and had a cute pink hand-drawn bear as the icon. She liked a lot of my videos and even added them to her own playlist, Cheer Bear Adventures, which seemed like a collection of videos made by other kids around my age. She'd leave these cute little comments for me, mostly just silly stuff. Her saying that she remembered when the stuff in the video happened to her, and how I was so good at making movies. It sounds pathetic, but reading all the stuff she was saying felt like the first ray of sun I'd felt on my skin for months. When I talked to my mom about anything I cared about, she was nice enough, but even as a kid, I could feel that her attention really wasn't mine. She was perfectly happy to stick me in front of a screen and live her own life. She'd talked to me before about why it was so important to learn to be self-sufficient, and I guess that's included being able to make new friends, especially one who seemed just as excited about the things that made me excited. I started writing to Cheer Bear daily, exchanging messages in the comments section of my videos. At first she suggested some new story ideas, then asked me about what other cartoons I like, if I had any siblings, pretty normal stuff. I mentioned at some point that it was getting cold where I lived, and she wanted to know where that was. I told her the name of the city that I lived in, and wouldn't you know, she lived nearby. Less than an hour, in fact. And knowing that, she wondered, would I be interested in having my very own private meet and greet with the real Cheer Bear? I know. Again, I ask for your understanding. I was almost 9 then, and my mom had recently started letting me try out a limited test run as a latchkey kid. I was allowed to walk home after school, let myself in, make myself a snack. She made it very clear I wasn't allowed to use knives or turn on the oven, and keep myself entertained until she made it home from the office. I wish I could say that I had gone to my mom and told her about the cool new friend I'd made, and that she wanted to visit me in real life. Instead, I carefully wrote my address into the comments of my video, and added that my mom usually didn't get home till 5. Have you ever noticed that nervousness and excitement are kind of the same feeling? The day Cheer Bear was supposed to visit me, I was barely able to sit still at my desk at school. I was so proud, like I had a secret that the other kids weren't worthy of knowing. I could barely wait until the bell rang. I ran the 5 blocks home and I let myself in. Barely a minute later, I heard a knock at the door. I want to assure you that nothing overtly bad happened to me that day, and I mean it, as bizarre as that sounds. I opened the door and there she was, Cheer Bear. Her pink, fluffy shape so big she had to turn sideways to fit through the door. She brought 2 things with her, a boombox tucked under one arm and a stuffed brown bear under the other. The second she came inside, I couldn't stop talking, asking her questions, telling her how happy I was to see her. She guided me towards the center of the room, motioning for me to stay there. I watched her, my entire body shaking with excitement. She placed the teddy on the shelf in front of us and the stereo on the ground. For the briefest moment, she turned her back to me, and I saw her pulling off her glove so she could click the play button. I remember thinking it was strange, the amount of hair she had on her arms. The music began to play. I remember overhearing a kid in my class bragging about how she met Mickey at Disneyland when she went the past summer. It was just a few moments with him, a quick wave, but she'd been riding that high for weeks after. What happened with Cheer Bear was a lot more than that. The CD started with the theme song for the Care Bear cartoon, and she started to dance. She had motioned for every lyric, spinning and gesturing with her arms. As the end of the song faded, she pulled me into a tight embrace. A second later, a new song began. Something else from the cartoon, and she started a new round of choreography to the next track. It became a loop. A new song, a hug, a new song, a hug. Over and over and over. She moved around the room faster, the energy behind her gestures almost manic. I remember dancing with her, trying to follow her speed, breathlessly falling into her arms during each hug. She was bigger than me. Bigger than Mom, even, with soft fur that smelled like wet earth. After what felt like ages, the last notes of the song faded out and the music finally stopped. Cheer Bear took both my hands in her own for a moment. We stood there, looking into each other's eyes. Although she hadn't said a single word since she arrived, I could hear the muffled sounds inside the suit, pants of exertion. She then guided me to face forward, towards the little teddy on the shelf, and together we bowed deeply. The visit was over. She sat me down on the couch, gathered her stereo and teddy bear, and let herself out the front door, fitting through the frame with only a little difficulty. As soon as she closed the door, I ran to the window to see her, but she was already gone. Mom didn't believe me, and I don't blame her. It sounds insane. Even just to write it now. A life-size version of my favorite stuffed animal showed up, danced with me for an afternoon, and left. At least I had enough sense not to brag about it at school. Even then I knew how unbelievable it was. Something about that day changed me, though. I felt like I'd been blessed somehow. Chosen for greatness like the characters in the videos I made. It was as if overnight I had developed a sense of confidence I'd never had before. I begged my mom to sign me up for dance classes, thinking maybe I could be even better if Cheer Bear ever came back. I stopped hiding in the bathroom stall during lunch and tried talking to other kids in my class. I was never popular, but I did find some other weirdos at school who were as excited about the same stuff as I was, and we started chatting endlessly on MSN Messenger after class. I slowly stopped making videos on my YouTube channel. For the first time in my life, I had friends to spend time with. I wasn't lonely anymore. By the time the holidays rolled around, the time I'd spent with Cheer Bear seemed more like a dream than reality. I'm sure I would have convinced myself it didn't happen if not for something that happened the week before Christmas. I just walked home from school when I saw something shiny and pink on the front step. A wrapped present addressed to me. I opened it, and to my absolute delight, I found a little teddy bear, exactly like the one Cheer Bear brought with her when we met. Up until tonight, that was the end of my story. This year I started my first year at college, and I'm living in the dorms. Tonight I was spending an uneventful Saturday night alone, studying for finals, when an email popped up in my inbox. Unknown sender. The message was brief. Is this you? I must be just as stupid as when I was a kid, because I clicked the link. It took me to an unlisted YouTube video, 30 minutes long. It started with a black screen. I pushed play. The Care Bear theme song came in first. Care Bear's countdown. 4, 3, 2, 1. I felt my breath catch in my chest. The song ended. And on the screen I saw myself as a child, falling into the arms of a stranger dressed as Cheer Bear. I watched the entire video. The quality was terrible, almost a fisheye lens, and as Cheer Bear began to dance more erratically, she would frequently step out of frame. But I was there on screen the whole time, looking awkward and clumsy and shy as I tried to dance along. There were some things that I saw in that video I didn't remember at all. For one, the fur was sort of matted and in different areas of the suit. A large dark patch under the arms and right under the neck where the head connected. The size was also alarming. Whoever was in that suit must have been over 6 feet tall. The costume almost seemed too small, and at times I could see a gap of skin between where the gloves and sleeves connected. And finally, in the last moment, when Cheerbear knelt over to pick up the camera, I swear I could see a glint of human eyes through the mesh, wide and white, with a pinprick pupil. It's been 3 hours since I received that email, and I honestly don't know what to do, and there's something I can't stop thinking about. Cheerbear never had a camera with her when she came into my house. She only had that little brown teddy. The same teddy I got for Christmas that year. The same teddy I'd kept in my bedroom every day after. The same teddy that's currently sitting on my nightstand in my dorm. I'm honestly not sure if I should email this person back, or what will happen if I do. Yes, I'm in that video, but who the fuck is in it with me? What a creepy story. This was from r/nosleep on Reddit, created by user switchboard-011. I'll put the link to the story in the description below, and it's not the only one they made. Fantastic. Man, I'll cover the other one. It looks good. It looks real good. Let me know what you think, and what story should I cover next. See you next time. I'm afraid the children were right about the monster. Mom told me to go outside and play. This was in the late 90s, in a town where nothing bad had ever really happened. Yeah, a couple of years before, some kids beat a girl to death, but they had been tried and put into jail or wherever messed up Canadian teenagers went. The streets were safe again. We had just moved into the neighborhood with my new stepfather and my even newer baby brother. Up until this point in my life, my mom had been a suffocating combination of overbearing and overprotective, but when she got remarried, everything abruptly changed. I was a few months away from turning 13, and she had a baby to look after and a house to decorate. So even though a year before she would have had a meltdown at the thought of me wandering the neighborhood alone, with kidnappers and devil worshippers and all that, now it was nothing more than a command she yelled out with her back turned as she changed a diaper. Jesus Christ, stop moving around. Go outside and play. The street we moved to was a big step up from our last apartment before she had met Mike. It was just the two of us in this crummy one-bedroom place. I got the bedroom and she had a futon in the living room next to a giant brick of a computer that she worked on late into the night. Life with Mike was a lot different than what I was used to. He managed all the money, paid all the bills, and bought this boat of a station wagon with a fancy backward-facing car seat. When he wanted Mom to quit her job to move from the city to the suburbs, she was more than happy to do it. At that point, she would have probably said yes to anything he'd asked. Our new house would have been really something if I'd had any friends. It was a long rectangular parcel of land on a quiet street that backed up onto a waterway that locals called the Gorge. It was sort of like an inlet branching off from the ocean, and the stretch outside our home was generally calm, the peace intermittently interrupted by a paddling kayaker, or more often, by the disgusting croaking of a rancidly smelly, oily blackbird that I later learned was a cormorant. Our whole house was still packed up in boxes. A few from where my mom and I had lived, more from Mike's place, and then the rest shiny new appliances and furniture from department stores, still packed in foam peanuts and huge swathes of cardboard. I was pretty sure Mike was rich, even though I did find it strange how he made Mom show him her grocery receipt each time she came home from the store, inspecting the price of every single item while she sat silently on the couch next to him. At the time, I just assumed that's what rich people needed to do, to know where their money was going. I knew there was a high school a few blocks away, and a middle school a little further down the road. It was too far for me to walk alone, but my mom had mentioned something about a bus. It was June, and the school year seemed far enough away that I could almost pretend that it would never happen. I had left the house with nothing in my pockets. This was before cell phones, and I was too young to carry bank cards or an ID. My mom had grabbed my arm before I left, and with a ballpoint pen, scrawled our new address on my forearm. I protested, but a part of me was glad she was still worried about me. "Don't go into the water," she said, already out of the room. I walked towards the park, hanging a left at the top of our driveway. The houses were all built to view the water, wraparound patios and giant windows that let me see inside almost every single one I passed. It was so profoundly different from the cramped building we'd moved from, it almost felt like another planet. There was a park a few blocks away, and I reached it in about 10 minutes. It was still early enough in the summer that the heat hadn't set in yet, and early enough in the day that the dew hadn't evaporated from the blades of grass in the yards I passed. I shivered as I entered the park, tall, ancient trees curving over the path, blocking the sun. It really was a beautiful place. Sometimes when I look back and try to focus on the moments before everything terrible happened, I can almost remember the smell, wet and earthy and alive. It felt like I'd stepped into the forest, and not just a beautifully manicured rich person park with smooth paved paths lined with iron street lamps. I heard the children's voices before I saw them. Tucked away off the path and close to the edge of the water, there were 3 of them, very clearly siblings, each with varying shades of blonde hair, the fair skin of their ears and noses tinged red by a recent sunburn. They were all kneeling over something wet, next to a pink plastic bucket full of water. The oldest seemed around my age. He had a rock in his hand, flat and heavy, fit perfectly in his palm. Next to him was a younger girl, with a thinner, jagged stone that she held like a dagger. They must have heard me, or at least heard me stop walking as I stared at them, because their heads all raised at once, dark eyes registering me at the same time. I opened my mouth to speak, but the youngest boy was quick to greet me, smiling through a set of missing front teeth. "Did you see the monster?" I hesitated, resisting the urge to look behind me to see if there was someone else they were talking to. "What?" I managed, nervously shifting my weight from foot to foot. The kid gestured to the pavement he was crouching over. There was something there, a silvery streak a little less than a foot long, some kind of weird fish that looked like a seahorse that had been pulled into a thin straight line. It took me another second to realize that he was talking about the creature spread flat on the ground. "Oh shit," I said, stepping forward. "What is that thing?" "It's a pipefish," the oldest kid said, face grim. "We caught it in the cove." Behind the children was a small, quiet stretch of beach, framed by 2 giant rocks that shielded it from the ocean currents that swirled a little further out. This wasn't the same gentle water that I saw outside of my home. This was where the gorge began to open up into the ocean. "You went into the ocean?" I asked, surprised. The kid's clothes were damp from the waist down, fat drops of salt water dripping onto the ground. The oldest boy shrugged. "We just waded in." I was about to ask something else, probably something stupid about if they were really allowed to swim or if their parents knew that they had tried to swim, when the younger girl suddenly shrieked, and with an awful burst of violence, brought down the sharp edge of her stone into the body of the creature. All at once, the voices of the children exploded into elated shouts, the youngest boy laughing and trying to grab the lower part of the body in his slippery, wet fingers. The fish moved then, ever so slightly, and I realized that it was still alive. Then the older brother grabbed its upper body, and with a yank, the 2 pulled it apart. They were like animals. In that next moment, all hands and chatter, trying to tear the body into smaller pieces, casting off parts that were too small to grab. I just watched, a foot away, close enough to see the pieces as they hit the pavement, with a wet, slapping sound. On the rock above, a cormorant landed, watching with great interest through beady black eyes. It was over as quickly as it had begun. The children were in high spirits now, all grins and heavy breaths. The youngest brother moved towards the bucket and with a swift motion pulled out another long, silvery fish, dropping it onto the ground with a splash. It writhed, ever so slightly in the water that pooled under it, barely enough to make a ripple. "What are you doing?" I asked, although I knew immediately that it was a stupid question. It was pretty obvious. They were tearing some sort of sea animals into pieces like wild dogs. I just watched it happen, and was probably about to watch it happen again. The younger girl spoke then, hands still curled around the sharp stone. "We're killing monsters," she said flatly. "First we catch them," she pointed to the water, "and then we kill them." Her finger moved towards the carnage on the ground below. The fish on the ground had stopped moving, and the older brother took a step towards it, grasping his rock in both hands. I saw his muscles tense as he made a swift movement and raised it above his head. The younger boy was laughing again, clasping his hands together, eager for what was about to come. "Wait," I said. The children stopped. The oldest stared at me, rock still above his head. I cleared my throat. "I saw a bigger one." I gestured towards the water. "A bigger monster." They turned to look out at the quiet water in the cove, and the tiny white caps just beyond its reach. The oldest looked back at me, skeptical. "I swear to God," I said. It was absolutely massive. I had caught their attention, even just momentarily. On the ground I saw a hint of movement from the fish as it held on desperately to life. "I can show you," I blurted out, looking around for something, anything to distract them. Next to the rock that protected the cove was a large tree with branches that seemed like they might just be low enough to reach. "Come on, I'll show you." I took a breath, then started to scramble up. Below me the oldest boy hesitated, his rock now hanging at his side as he palmed it with an agitated grip. "What?" I asked, a taunting edge to my voice. "Are you scared?" One by one, the kids followed me up the branches, scrambling onto the flat top of the rock. The younger boy was almost too small to reach, but his oldest brother and I worked together to pull him up. We were at a good vantage point now, still under the tree, but now with a clear view of the choppy water, and the sheltered cove that lay below us. Even from this height, I could see the sun catch on the scaled pieces of flesh that were spread out on the pavement below. I tried to gesture outwards, with a confident resolution, somewhere just off the shore. "That's where I saw it," I told them. "Huge! At least 6 feet long. It was crazy." The oldest brother curled his lip, studying my expression closely. "That's impossible," he said. "They don't even get that big." This one did. I felt a surge of adrenaline now as I watched him look out to the ocean, his features softening ever so slightly as he considered what I was saying. I crossed my arms across my chest against the chill of the wind. "If you want a real monster, that's where it is, but only if you're not afraid." I took a step backward, a plan forming in my head. I would jump down, take the bucket, put the fish back in the water. It wouldn't stop them forever, but at least I wouldn't have to watch them kill anything else. I turned just for a moment to see the fastest way to climb down, when one of the younger kids gasped loudly, their voice only a little louder than the wind that had begun to pick up. The oldest brother was gone. His siblings leaned over the edge, his sister on all fours, staring down into the swirling water and rocks below us. We waited, for a moment, in silence, watching for him to emerge. He didn't. I was frozen in place. It was his sister next who dropped her rock and jumped down into the water, screaming her brother's name as she fell. My whole life I've been so careful to avoid reading anything about the aftermath of what happened, which was difficult considering the television segments and articles, and local newspapers with black and white photos of a beautiful family that was just so happy before tragedy pulled it apart. When I try to remember the name she yelled, all I hear is the roar of the wind and the splash her body made when it hit the water. I saw her head then, briefly, a mess of stringy blonde hair that immediately dipped below the surface, out of sight. A moment passed, but I didn't see her again. Up until this point, I believe I was faultless, a victim of circumstance and a misguided good deed. But what happened next I do genuinely regret. But you have to understand, when the youngest boy turned to me, tears in his eyes, I reached out to comfort him, to pull him away from his edge, and I watched as his gaze went to my arm. The arm where my address was penned in my mother's neat printing. A house that she was so excited about starting a new life in, away from all the unpaid bills and cramped apartments, and late hours she spent working just to keep the lights on. It was her I thought of as I put my hands on the little boy's shoulders, pushing him backward off the rock and into the water. Like his siblings, he sank, the swirling tide covering any hint of a splash. I came down from the rock then, carefully finding sturdy branches for my feet to settle on as I returned to the ground. I did what I'd planned to do. I emptied the bucket in the ocean and returned to get the fish. By that point, it was clearly very dead, and even though it hung lifelessly in my hands, I still threw it back into the water, hoping the gesture counted in some small way. Then I went home. Nobody ever came to ask me anything. And why would they? From how my mom explained it to me, her voice hushed and gentle as the local news played in the background, it was an awful accident. 3 young kids were playing by the water, catching the fish that swam near the shore, and had somehow fallen in. They got caught in a riptide, which wasn't uncommon for the area. Locals knew not to swim there, and after the deaths, some shiny new signs were installed to warn people to stay out of the water. My mom kept me inside for the rest of the summer, fussing over me the moment I stepped foot outside, and only allowing me to accompany her and my brother when she went to run errands, pushing the stroller into the park as I stayed close by her side. Whenever we passed by the little cove, I always tried to avert my eyes. Even then, I knew it was all a mistake. I was just a child myself. Still, it was strange living so close to where they all had died. In our house at night, I would sometimes look out my window at the calm waters at the edge of our property, and more than once, I swear I saw something shiny and thin glimmering in the water at least 6 feet long. I was never able to look good before I would see it disappear under the surface, never to re-emerge. It's been years since this happened, and even though I'm grown with children of my own, I often catch myself looking into bodies of water and seeing the hint of something long and lean rippling underneath the surface. And in these moments I catch myself thinking the same thing I used to ask myself when I was young. Could it be that the children in the cove were right after all? Is it possible that the monster really does exist? Wow. Yet another awesome story by Switchboard-011 from Reddit. Man, tell you what, cool little twist. I thought there'd actually be a monster, and I guess in a way, one was made that day. Seriously though, Great story. Really enjoyed reading it. I hope you enjoyed it too. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye. I worked the graveyard shift at an old prison. I've seen things you wouldn't believe. When you work the graveyard shift at a prison, you see some messed up stuff. And I'm not talking about the kind of stuff you're thinking of right now. Inmates killing their bunkmates, screaming all through the night, shitting themselves and rubbing the shit all over. Hell, since I'm the only female guard on night watch, I get these guys nutting through the bars as I walk by at least once a month. None of that is unusual. That's the basic stuff. The kind of stuff that makes you get mad and shout. I'm talking about the kind of stuff that makes you go quiet. The stuff that when you see it or hear it, you go pale. Your eyes go wide. Something happened recently that slots straight into this category. It's hard to even put into words, honestly. To explain it to you, I've got to go to the very start of the story. I was doing my rounds on an otherwise normal night. Fucko Phil had been shouting for a while, as he usually did, so me and my night watch partner, Armin, had gone in and beat him quiet. Phil had made a habit of shouting all day and all night about how he was innocent, and goddamn it was it annoying. Beating inmates was business as usual for us, but there was no other way to reel them in when they got rowdy. You might think it harsh, but it's just the way we do things. Anyway, apart from Fucko Phil being Fucko Phil, we don't know how he got that nickname by the way, it was a normal night. Until we go to Lee's cell. Didn't think much of it at first. Lee was a lifer, in for killing 6 rival gangers in a shootout. He was sitting on the ground at the far end of his cell, with his back against the wall, and his knees up against his chest. Wasn't unusual for inmates to stay up late, jacking off, or doing not much of anything, so my partner and I walked on by. Wasn't worth our time to force inmates to go to bed, least of all a stone-cold guy like Lee. After patrol, we typically kick back in the control room, watching the cams for a couple hours. Actually, to tell you the truth, neither of us really bothered to do what we were supposed to be doing in there. I mean, hell, there were like 20 of these cams, and there was never anything worth looking at on them. Just a series of long hallways, dimly lit and all grainy. I'm sitting in control right now as I type this, and looking up, there's not a worthwhile thing to be seen. Anyway, after a couple hours, we headed out on our second patrol, and when we got to Lee's cell, he was sitting the exact same, staring the exact same. "Lee?" I called to him. "Get to bed already." He didn't answer or move or anything. Even in the dark, the whites of his eyes were bright, and when I swung my flashlight on him, the glow shimmered off his arms and his forehead like he was sweating buckets. I looked up at this bunkmate. He was fast asleep, snoring soundly. I looked back at Lee. "Lee, I'm not going to tell you again. Get to bed. Lee, answer me." Nothing. He was frozen, like a statue. Only this statue was shaking a little. And those eyes. God damn. They looked like they were about to pop right out of his head. "Fucking freak," my partner muttered. "Come on, Melly. Ain't worth it." I nodded and went along, leaving Lee to his shenanigans. But it didn't sit right with me. The way he was just sitting there and staring. I felt like he was staring right through me. As my partner and I got back into the control room, the lights and screens flickered a little. Didn't think anything of it. Our slammer was one of the older ones. We got back to scrolling our phones till the end of our shift. About Lee, you're probably thinking that he was just a loony like the rest of the inmates, and that loonies do loony shit all the time, right? You'd be right, usually. Basic stuff. But get this. That morning, right when I got home after my shift, I got a call from work. First time they'd ever called me at that hour. Then another first time thing. The prison warden himself was on the line. "Melly," he said, "what the fuck happened with Lee?" He was acting a little odd, I told him. "That's all, sir." "Melly," he said, "Lee is dead. Dawn Patrol found him with his throat torn out." My first thought was that his bunkmate did him in. Basic stuff, right? But apparently his bunkmate woke up when Dawn Patrol went in there to investigate, and the bunkmate was so damn scared by what he saw that he literally pissed himself. Dawn Patrol swore that it couldn't have been an act. Well, they pinned the murder on him anyway. Bunkmate got life on top of life. Basic stuff, that. We don't do the whole court case thing in our prison. You know, where cops look everything over and witnesses take the stand and ultimately smart people decide who's guilty and who's not. Nah. Usually we just pick whoever looks most suspect at a given situation, and the judge slaps another life sentence on him, doubling or tripling the life sentence they first came in for. The next night I went by Lee's cell again on my patrol. They'd cleaned the place up and his bunkmate was still in there. Kinda fucked up, honestly, that they didn't even move him, but that's basic stuff. Things got even weirder then. Lee's bunkmate, his name was Walter, was awake and crying in the cell. I figured he was crying because of the new life sentence, which meant that he no longer had any chance of parole. Not that he was getting parole anyway, seeing as he killed his wife and mailed parts of her to her family out of spite. But that wasn't it. He stood up when I got to his cell and grabbed the bars so fast that I leapt back, hand on my baton. "You gotta do me in," he barked. What? I stuttered. "Make it quick. Do me in. I'm begging." Armin, my partner, chuckled. "What's your deal, Walt?" "It's coming." Walter spat that out. Literally, I had to wipe my face with the back of my hand. "It?" Armin drawled. "Golly, I'm next. Do me in, please. Quick and painless, please." Armin and I exchanged glances. He was smirking. I was frowning. "Walt, nobody is coming after you," I told him. "Except maybe us." Walter began to cry again, as he pressed his cheeks against the cold bars. "Please," he begged. "Come on, Millie," Armin rumbled. I followed as he continued on down the hall. Walter started moaning. No. He thumped his head lightly against the bars as we walked off, rattling them. Armin scoffed, shaking his head. I looked at him. Any idea what that was about? I heard inmates whispering about it now and again. It's like a folktale for lifers. A folktale? A fairy tale, spooky story, whatever you want to call it. Don't let it bother you. I shrugged. Didn't know inmates had folktales. Thought they were too stupid to come up with anything like that. You're probably right. A visitor must have tried to spook one of them one time and it happened to take hold. We didn't talk for the rest of our rounds, and luckily Fucko Phil was actually quiet that night. All in all, it was an easy patrol. We got back to control, grabbed a coffee each, and kicked back. As usual, neither of us bothered looking at the displays. The control room was a glorified break room, and it almost made the other crap we had to deal with on that job worth it. I was lost in some Twitter thread when the lights went out. There was a loud zap and snap, and they were off. The displays were still on but crackling. Even my phone was flickering. "God damn!" Armin shouted. By the look of his face against the glow of the screens, he wasn't mad. He was rattled. I'd never seen Armin rattle before. "What's going on?" I asked. "Power outage?" He was staring at the cams, eyes bouncing from one screen to the next. The lights were out in the halls too. The cameras were lit in a greenish hue as their night vision kicked in. Nah, no way. The cells are power locked. We have like 5 backup generators for that exact reason, and I don't see anyone busting out. Besides, the screens are still up, right? So the lights are just whacked out. "Holy shit, Armin," I whispered. "What about the regular locks? The ones we have keys for?" "They're old as shit," Armin said. "Everyone knows it, including the inmates. Could kick through those things easily. It's the auto locks that keep them shut." One of the cams caught my eye. "Armin, look there." What the fuck? We both stared in silence at the cam at the end of Walter's hallway. It caught his cell at an angle, enough so that we could see him still standing there where we'd left him. He was slamming his head against the bars. Not lightly like earlier. He was throwing his whole damn weight at them. I looked at Armin. "We should..." "Oh, shit!" I nearly fell off my chair at Armin shouting. I looked back at the cam. Walter's cell door had opened. Oh shit. The power was out, and he was stumbling over the space in front of his nook. "Fuck! We gotta lock the door to control. Got a radio for backup." I snatched the radio from the table beneath the cams, clicked the button, and... nothing. The radio was out. I tried my phone. It was still whacked out. "Millie!" Armin gasped. "Look!" Walter was still outside his cell. He had grabbed the bars, from the outside this time, and was going at it again, ramming his head against them. There was black spreading across the bars and the floor at his feet. Blood, probably. Somehow that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part was that the other inmates hadn't tried to bust out. They hadn't even walked up to their bars. Not one of them. These dudes would squeeze their faces against the bars any time anything the least bit interesting happened. Yet now they were all tucked away. Armin and I were frozen, as if something bad would happen if one of us got up. I could have sworn that the air was colder than usual in control. For a moment, I even thought I saw my own breath visible in front of me. I felt like I was in a bad dream. It all felt surreal, and went against everything I'd experienced in that prison. Just then I thought I saw... something. At the end of the hall, down from Walter's cell. It was like the light reaching the cam from that place was scratchy. For an instant, and I can't be sure, because the night vision was blurry as hell, It looked as though Walter turned his head to the side, looking down the hall toward that distorted place. I opened my mouth to mention to Armin, but then Walter wound up and threw himself at the bars hard. Didn't need high definition to see that his neck snapped. He collapsed, his head dangling around his torso like a melon in a sack. I yelped. Then I screamed, because the lights came back on with a loud zap and snap. "Damn," Armin muttered. "Radio should be back up. Let's call it in." "Call what in?" He stammered. Power outage, broken out prisoner, and, prisoner suicide, psychotic break." I did as Armin asked. The radio was back up, everything was back to normal, and for what it was worth, nobody else was broken out. The doors were probably back up. We locked up in the control room as we waited for backup. No way we were going to chance it out on the block until it was a sure thing that the cells were secure. We didn't speak much while we waited. "Fucking schizo," was all Armin said, mostly to himself. Not a label I like to use, personally, but it was true that the inmates were often sick in the head. Walter had clearly been sick in the head. Finally, backup arrived. It took all of 5 minutes for the contracted mercs to confirm that the cells were secure. Apart from the mess Walter had made, everything was in order. Dawn was coming round, and it was nearly time for me to head home when one of the inmates called me over. It was Mike, the lifer who had a thing for kids. I didn't want to talk to him, honestly. He liked really young kids. But he insisted, and with the weirdness of that day, I figured I'd hear him out. I walked up, crossed my arms. "What do you want?" I didn't look at him. He was frazzled, more than what's usual for guys like him. "You gotta talk to the warden. Shit, talk to the governor if you gotta. Tell them the prison ain't safe anymore, that the doors ain't working. Whatever you gotta tell them, just get us transferred." I nearly laughed. Transferred? This isn't the kind of spot where you get to request transfers, Mike. Not just us inmates, yourself too. Believe me, man, we need to get out of here. "And why is that?" His mouth snapped shut. I glanced at him and saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. And that's saying something, because you see all kinds of weird shit in eyes like Mike's. He opened his mouth and spoke slowly. "Our turn's come. Bad fucking luck. It won't leave until it's had its fill." "What are you on about?" I asked. I didn't want to give Mike, of all people, the benefit of the doubt, yet my voice was a little uneven. He swallowed, then whispered, "Stalker." I rolled my eyes. Without another word, I stepped away and made toward the exit, eager to be done for the day. "Listen to me," Mike begged. "It's for your good as much as mine." He kept going, getting louder as I got farther away. "Goddamn whore," he shouted, giving his bars a kick that drew the attention of one of the morning guys. He got hushed up real quick as I left the block. As I drove home after that shift, I felt stupid, because I couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said. Walter had mentioned something similar as well, before his incident. It was something Armin had heard of too, apparently. I resolved to ask my partner about it next shift. He'd laugh at me, but better that than talking about it with that thing called Mike. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and when I finally did fall asleep, I had a nightmare. You think this nightmare would be about throats torn out and heads smashed against bars, right? But no, the nightmare was me in a hallway. It was an empty hallway of stone walls and cement flooring, dimly lit by those cold lights we have at work. But it wasn't really empty. At the far end of the hallway, the space there was wrong. The air was wrong. Now, I can't explain it. I told you at the start of the story, didn't I? It's hard to put into words. Shit. Just trying to write this is giving me chills, making me feel all cold. Anyway, I got to my next shift, said hey to Armin, and we got going on our rounds. You might think it unusual that we would just carry on at the prison despite the recent happenings. Thing is, from the point of view of the higher-ups, these incidents weren't that big of a deal. Death and gore are business as usual in a prison like ours. You had to be there during these events to really grasp that what was happening was particularly messed up. During patrol, Armin acted as cool as ever. I couldn't tell you whether that was a front or not. I hoped it wasn't because of what I was about to say. Have you heard of a thing called the Stalker? I asked him. He looked at me sidelong for a split second. Man, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. What was that supposed to mean? I kept quiet as we rounded a corner, dropping into Walter and Lee's hallway. Don't listen to that shit, Armin said. These guys are crazy, Melly. Don't take them seriously. I'm not taking them seriously. I'm just curious, dude. Armin sighed. Alright then, I'll tell you. Relax. We walked past the cell that Lee and Walter had lived in for years. It was empty now, as you'd expect, at least until they fixed up the door. They cleaned the place up, but you could still see faint brown stains along the bars and the floor. Armin continued. Like I said the other day, it's a kind of myth for these guys. They think the stalker is something that comes after people like them. I frowned. People like them? People who have done terrible things. Huh. I shrugged. Fair's fair. More power to the stalker. Armin grinned at me. That's what I'm saying. Makes our job easier, eh? I chuckled, though I didn't really find it all that funny. We carried on in silence, our footsteps echoing off the walls and ringing across the block. The inmates were quieter than usual, and when we walked past their cells, they'd eye us warily. Even Fucko Phil was chill. That was the second shift in a row that he had been. His best streak yet in the 2 years I'd worked on that block. A while later, Armin and I were back in control, coffees and smartphones in hand. I was reminded of the early days on the job, because for the first time in ages, I felt compelled to look at the displays. I tried to find something interesting to distract me on my phone, but my eyes kept drifting up to the cams. I stole a glance at Armin and saw that he was the same, and like me, he was trying to keep it on the down low. Yeah, I was feeling a little cold, so I told Armin I was going to grab a hoodie from my locker. He nodded without a word. I stepped out of the control room and made for the end of the hallway, where the lockers were. As I was slipping my hoodie over my head, I saw the glow of the locker room lights through the fabric, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw them flicker. I yanked my hoodie all the way on and looked around the room. Things seemed normal. I started back toward control, walking quicker than I had when I left. I nearly leapt right back out of my hoodie when a resounding zap and snap shook the hallway. The lights went out all at once. I was in pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, which was in my pocket. As I drew it out, I lost hold of it. It clattered and slid on the concrete floor. Shit! I gasped as I felt frantically along the ground. The cement flooring was so damn cold under my hands. I heard another snapping sound from the far end of the hall. I was still blind, my phone unrecovered. Then an orb of light appeared from where the sound had come. It seared my eyes against the otherwise pitch black. I gasped as the orb began to hover toward me. My phone. I needed my phone. I looked down at the now illuminated floor and saw where it had fallen. I snatched it and held it up, swiping frantically, trying to get my light on. My flashlight came on just as the orb came within 5 feet of me. Armin, what the fuck? Millie, wasn't sure it was you out here. Sorry. Who else would it have been? I growled. You could have said something instead of scaring the shit out of me. Armin gestured with his hand, pressing his palm downward. Quiet. The fucking power's off again. He was right. The power was off and the inmates could break out again, same as the last shift. I shut my mouth and nodded. Armin helped me. I dusted myself off, taking a few deep breaths, just trying to calm the hell down. I shouldn't have taken my time. The door opposite of control, the one that led to the block, flew open, slamming against the door stopper so hard it crushed the thing entirely. That door was supposed to be locked, but we never bothered with that since it just made patrols more tedious. Another mistake that, because now Hector, one of the biggest and baddest of our inmates, was barreling down the hall straight for us. Oh shit! Armin roared. He snatched his baton from his hip. That was when I realized I had left mine in control, and stood ready as Hector ran at us. I held up my phone, shining a light on the inmate. Ain't no fucking way! Hector screamed as he thumped down the hallway. Ain't no goddamn way I'm staying in there! Armin leapt up to meet Hector, swinging his baton as hard as he could. The big guy didn't even seem to notice him. Maybe he was blinded by my flashlight, or maybe he just didn't have time for either of us. In any case, Armin's baton made clean and brutal contact with the side of Hector's head, sending the giant tumbling to the ground. He damn near fell on me. We thought he was out cold. We were wrong. As we approached, Hector swung at Armin with a punch that would have killed him if he hadn't ducked away, letting the fist glance off his head instead of crushing it. Do it! Hector shouted. Fucking do it or I'll do you in first! The giant was grabbing Armin now, slamming against the wall. I had to act, had to somehow neutralize him. I ran at Hector, leapt and kicked his head. I guess his skull was already fractured from the baton hit earlier, because when I laid him out against the wall, his head caved in entirely, with a crunch that I'll never forget. A zap, a snap. The lights came back on. I turned away, not wanting to look at what was left of Hector, and then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, right next to the door Hector had broken, was that same sort of wrongness. The air there wasn't right. The air was bent, or twisted. For a moment, that twisted air started to take a shape that vaguely resembled a man. Then it faded. The end of the hallway was normal, aside from the fact that a goddamn prisoner had destroyed the door to the block. A prisoner who I had just killed. Shit! Armin cursed as he shoved Hector off himself. Oh shit! Oh god, no! I strained to listen, feeling lightheaded. Were any other inmates free of their cells? I couldn't hear a thing from the block. All was quiet. I stood and walked toward the busted door. Melly? Armin whispered from behind me. Melly, stop! I ignored him. Reaching the end of the hall, I turned and looked out at the block. Everything was quiet, apart from Hector's cell door, which had blown off of its hinges so fiercely that it fell down from the second story and onto the tables below. Everything was normal. Not a single pair of eyes peeked past cell bars at me, despite the fact that every last one of those prisoners heard a commotion. My memory of the remainder of that day is real fuzzy. I know that we called in the breakout and the downed inmate right away. Then we got cleaned up. Then we got interviewed by the warden. Then by the police. Then we went home, because we weren't in any trouble or anything. We'd only defended ourselves. Basic stuff, right? Both of us were offered paid time off. I took the 2 weeks, but Armin being Armin, he turned down the offer. He said he was fine and wanted to keep working, so they let him. I used the 2 weeks to get my head right. I flipped my sleep schedule to what's considered normal, then I saw some family, saw a ball game, saw an old friend, the works. The days were great. The nights weren't. I'd toss and turn, that image of Hector vivid in my mind. Eventually I'd fall asleep, and every damn time I'd dream of that cold hallway and that wrongness. And let me tell you, waking from nightmares in the dark of night was way worse than waking in daylight. By the time I got back to work, I was relieved. Working through the night and snoozing during the day suited me just fine. I had a hop in my step as I got back to the clink. I'd nearly forgotten all that nonsense about the stalker. The Hector thing was far from gone, as you'd expect, but I could push that aside well enough. Simon, the fella who had filled in for me during the 2 weeks, briefed me before my shifts, and he had some great news. At long last, those useless old locks have been replaced with new ones that no amount of strength could bust through. So now, even if the power went out, the inmates would stay in their cells. Thank God for that. But Simon also had bad news. During my 2 weeks off, 8 inmates had died. All suicides. He also told me that Armin hadn't been acting right. Honestly, that spooked me more than anything. Armin, of all people? Tilted? I figured Simon was exaggerating and brushed it off. After the briefing and getting changed, I paced down the hallway to control, taking care not to look at the spot where Hector had laid. Stepping into the control room, I found Armin looking down at his baton. He smiled big when he saw me and gave me one of his bear hugs. I could tell he was glad to have me back. How's things? I asked him as I sat in my chair. Yeah, you know, Armin said without looking at me. The schizos have been doing schizo things, the usual. I'd more so meant to ask how things were outside of work, but I didn't press for that. Yeah, I heard. 8 suicides? God damn, we'll have a state-level investigation come down on us soon. Ha! Armin chuckled. Already in the works. Investigators will be here in a few weeks, but not state-level. Even higher. A couple CIA agents will be coming down. Weird, huh? My stomach fluttered a little. Shit. Weird for sure. I saw that vivid image of Hector's caved-in skull in my mind's eye. Don't think we're in trouble, do you? Armin raised his eyebrows. No way, Mel. Don't sweat it. It's not us. It's the schizos that are the problem. You're right, I agreed. Let's just keep doing our thing and let the bigwigs sort out the crazies. The first half of the shift went by pretty quick. On our first patrol, Fucko Phil was back to his hollering, so we hushed him up, though he gave us a mouthful and a half about how he was safe because he was innocent. A few of the other inmates asked for transfers, including that rat Mike, but Armin and I just ignored them. I tried joking with my partner a couple of times as we went, but he just smirked back. It was when we were pivoting to head back to control from the far end of the block that Armin froze. I didn't even notice at first. I walked a dozen or so paces before realizing he wasn't at my side. Spinning round, I saw him frozen mid-step, as though he were playing a game of red light, green light, and the light had just turned red. I gave an awkward smile. Armin? You alright, bud? He was staring to my side, eyes wide as hell. I looked to my side, saw nothing there at all. Frowning, I said, Armin, you're creeping me out, man. Suddenly he shook himself and said, 1 sec, I gotta hit the bathroom. I wanted to ask what his deal was, all of a sudden. But he had turned and gone toward the bathroom before I could even open my mouth. Confused and a little annoyed, I went back to control on my own. When Armin got back in 5 minutes after me, he acted all normal. Armin, I said to him, we gonna talk about what happened out there? He shrugged. Taco Bell. Armin, cut the shit. He grinned at me. Mel, what do you want me to say? The Taco Bell from earlier wanted to come out all at once. Matter of life and death, you know? He patted his belly. I'm feeling all better now, though. Huh, I grunted. If you say so. We grabbed our coffees and our phones and settled in for the hour-long break before our next patrol. I glanced over at Armin while I kicked back and saw him staring at his baton more often than not. His eyes also darted over my shoulder a few times to the control room door. It was one of those doors that had a glass window built into the top half of it. His staring at it creeped me out, but I didn't want to look over my shoulder and make it a whole thing, you know? It was nearly time for our next patrol, when I came across a video I thought was hilarious. Oh man, Armin, check this. Armin stood up so fast that his chair rolled back and clattered against the back wall. At the exact same time, the lights flickered. Armin, what the hell? Gotta get something for my car. Be back in a sec. What? Armin? He burst out of the room, running down the hall toward the front of the prison. I was stunned for a moment, thinking to myself about how right Simon had been about Armin. Then I got up and turned around to go to the parking lot and see. I tripped over myself and fell backward when I saw who or what rather was standing behind the door's glass window. My breath rose in a visible plume in front of me as I stared. A corpse stood there, all blurry and scratchy. Or at least I thought I had seen a corpse for a moment, but I blinked and then there was nothing at all. Distant visions of a cracked open head and a bloodied body echoed in my mind, but otherwise the only thing I saw through that window was the stone wall beyond. Holy shit, was I losing it too? Brushing my tangled, wriggling thoughts aside, I went out and after Armin. I dashed out to the parking lot and looking at his go-to parking spot, I saw that he was gone. I looked around the rest of the lot, knowing it was futile because Armin was a creature of habit and he always parked in his usual spot. His car wasn't there. He was gone. Bewildered, I went back inside. It was bad enough that I left the block unattended for those few minutes. I needed to get back in there and close out my shift. I told myself that Armin's Taco Bell predicament had hit him again. Hard enough this time that he needed to see a doctor. He was the type to be embarrassed over stuff like that and too proud to talk about it, so he ran off without a word. It was the next evening, not long before my shift, that the warden himself called me to tell me that Armin had quit. I didn't believe him at first, but when the warden started getting pissed at me for questioning it, I realized he wasn't kidding around. Armin had quit. No notice or anything. My partner of 2 years and my good friend left without a word. I texted him right away and even tried calling him, but he ghosted me. I wanted to work that night because what else was I going to do? Simon filled for Armin, and I wondered if he was going to become my new full-time partner. He was friendly and cute, I had to admit, but he wasn't nearly as easygoing as Armin had been. Simon and I were on our first patrol when it happened to me again. We were strolling down the block. For a fraction of a second, I saw a dude peeking out from around a corner, from a spot where there shouldn't have been anyone. It was the faintest thing, and at the edge of my vision. But I could have sworn there was a big guy standing there, one eye and shoulder poking out from behind the wall. "Millie?" Simon asked with a frown. "You all right?" I shook myself. "All good. I have a headache. That's all. Let's keep going." I started to worry that I was actually losing it. A lot of fucked up shit had happened on our block recently, and my mental was all rattled. Maybe I needed to take another break. Paid time off be damned. A couple weeks, or maybe a month. Maybe I needed to go on a proper vacation, to hit the beaches and really unwind. I was thinking about that in the control room when I happened to glance up at the cams to see that corpse once more. It was gone again after I blinked, but this big dude had filled every goddamn display like he was right up by the cameras, and the afterimage in my mind was more vivid somehow. The eyes were blank and glowing. The mouth was drooping and half open. The one side of the skull was caved in, ropes of brain dangling out over the face. It was nauseating, even through the grainy display. I looked over at Simon and saw him chuckling at something he was watching on his phone, unperturbed. I decided that I really was losing it right then, and after my shift I put in a request to get some time off. The warden was pissed since Armin had just ditched too, but I was upfront about my mental being in bad shape, so he gave in and told me he'd let me off in a few weeks once he found someone to cover me. And that brings us to the present day. I'm still waiting for my vacation, but hanging in there. Simon's been a godsend. He really looks out for me. Even now he's gone out to get his coffees. Good coffees, not the shit we make here in Control. I've been having my hallucination, more than I care to admit. It's the same goddamn guy, peeking at me from the edge of my vision and from around corners. The part of my mind that isn't rational tells me it's Hector haunting me. The sensible part tells me I need a break from all this shit. Anyway, I thought sharing all this with you people on the internet might help me unwind a bit while I wait for my time off. It's crazy working in a place like this, and definitely not something I'd recommend. Damn, my fingers are getting stiff. Too cold in here. Should probably post this and hop off till I get my coffee and warm up. Now the lights are flickering. Let me guess, next a zap and a snap and the lights go out. Right. Thanks for reading. That was a story by Mo Wanders over on Reddit on the r/NoSleep forum. Man, I'll tell you what, that was quite a cool story. I really enjoyed the fact that, you know, there was multiple casualties. Saying that out loud, that sounds really bad. I like the fact there was. I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna stop my head, but I'm not gonna take this out because it's funny. I'm gonna leave it in. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed the story. I know I sure did. It was really fun to read, and it really had me on edge quite a bit. I really enjoyed it, and I really hope you did too. See you for the next one. The Spook House by Ambrose Bierce. On the road leading north from Manchester, in eastern Kentucky, to Boonville, 20 miles away, stood, in 1862, a wooden plantation house of a somewhat better quality than most of the dwellings in that region. The house was destroyed by fire in the year following, probably by some stragglers from the retreating column of General George W. Morgan, when he was driven from Cumberland Gap to the Ohio River by General Kirby Smith. At the time of its destruction, it had, for 4 or 5 years, been vacant. The fields about it were overgrown with brambles, the fences gone, even the few quarters and outhouses generally fallen partly into ruin by neglect and pillage. For the Negroes and poor whites of the vicinity found in the building and fences an abundant supply of fuel, of which they availed themselves without hesitation, openly and by daylight. By daylight alone, after nightfall, no human being except passing strangers ever went near the place. It was known as the Spook House, that it was tenanted by evil spirits, visible, audible, and active. No one in all that region doubted any more than he doubted what he was told of Sundays by the traveling preacher. Its owner's opinion of the matter was unknown. He and his family had disappeared one night, and no trace of them had ever been found. They left everything: household goods, clothing, provisions, the horses in the stable, the cows in the field, in the quarters, all as it stood. Nothing was missing, except a man, a woman, 3 girls, a boy, and a babe. It was not altogether surprising that a plantation where 7 human beings could be simultaneously effaced and nobody the wiser should be under some suspicion. One night in June 1859, 2 citizens of Frankfurt, Colonel J.C. McArdle, a lawyer, and Judge Myron Vey of the state militia were driving from Boonville to Manchester. Their business was so important that they decided to push on, despite the darkness and the mutterings of an approaching storm, which eventually broke upon them just as they arrived opposite the Spook House. The lightning was so incessant that they easily found their way through the gateway and into a shed, where they hitched and unharnessed their team. They then went to the house through the rain and knocked at all the doors without getting any response. Attributing this to the continuous uproar of the thunder, they pushed at one of the doors, which yielded. They entered without further ceremony and closed the door. That instant they were in darkness and silence. Not a gleam of the lightning's unceasing blaze penetrated the windows or crevices. Not a whisper of the awful tumult without reaching them there. It was as if they had suddenly been stricken blind and deaf. And McArdle afterwards said that for a moment he believed himself to have been killed by a stroke of lightning as he crossed the threshold. The rest of this adventure can as well be related in his own words from the Frankfurt Advocate of August 6, 1876. When I had somewhat recovered from the dazing effect of the transition from uproar to silence, my first impulse was to reopen the door which I had closed, and from the knob of which I was not conscious of having removed my hand, I felt it distinctly, still in the clasp of my fingers. My notion was to ascertain by stepping again into the storm whether I had been deprived of sight and hearing. I turned the doorknob and pulled open the door. It led into another room. This apartment was suffused with a faint greenish light, the source of which I could not determine, making everything distinctly visible, though nothing was sharply defined. Everything, I say, but in truth the only object within the blank stone walls of that room were human corpses. In number, they were perhaps 8 or 10. It may well be understood that I did not truly count them. They were of different ages, or rather sizes, from infancy up, and of both sexes. All were prostrate on the floor, excepting one, apparently of a young woman, who sat up, her back supported by an angle of the wall. A babe was clasped in the arms of another and older woman. A half-grown lad lay face downwards across the legs of a full-bearded man. 1 or 2 were nearly naked, and the hand of a young girl held the fragment of a gown which she had torn open at the breast. The bodies were in various stages of decay, all greatly shrunken in face and figure. Some were but little more than skeletons. While I stood stupefied with horror by this ghastly spectacle and still holding open the door, by some unaccountable perversity my attention was diverted from the shocking scene and concerned itself with trifles and details. Perhaps my mind, with an instinct of self-preservation, sought relief in matters which would relax this dangerous tension. Among other things, I observed that the door that I was holding open was of heavy iron plates, riveted. Equidistant from one another and from the top and bottom, 3 strong bolts protruded from the beveled edge. I turned the knob and they were retracted flush with the edge, released it, and they shot out. It was a spring lock. On the inside there was no knob, nor any kind of projection. A smooth surface of iron. While noting these things with an interest and attention, which it now astonishes me to recall I felt myself thrust aside, and Judge Vey, whom in the intensity and vicissitudes of my feelings I had altogether forgotten, pushed by me into the room. "For God's sakes," I cried, "do not go in there. Let us get out of this dreadful place." He gave no heed to my entreaties, but, as fearless a gentleman as lived in all the South, walked quickly to the center of the room, knelt beside one of the bodies for a closer examination, and tenderly raised its blackened and shriveled head in his hands. A strong, disagreeable odor came through the doorway, completely overpowering me. My senses reeled. I felt myself falling, and in clutching at the edge of the door for support, pushed it shut with a sharp click. I remember no more. 6 weeks later I recovered my reason in a hotel at Manchester, whither I had been taken by strangers the next day. For all these weeks I had suffered from a nervous fever, attended with constant delirium. I had been found lying in the road several miles away from the house, but how I had escaped from it to get there, I never knew. On recovery, or as soon as my physicians permitted me to talk, I inquired the fate of Judge Vey, whom, to quiet me, as I now know, they represented as well and at home. No one believed a word of my story, and who can wonder? And who can imagine my grief when, arriving at my home in Frankfurt 2 months later, I learned that Judge Vey had never been heard of since that night. I then regretted bitterly the pride which since the first few days after the recovery of my reason had forbidden me to repeat my discredited story and insist upon its truth. With all that afterward occurred, the examination of the house, the failure to find any room corresponding to that which I have described, the attempt to have me adjudged insane, and my triumph over my accusers, the readers of the Advocate are familiar. After all these years, I am still confident that excavations which I have neither the legal right to undertake nor the wealth to make would disclose the secret of the disappearance of my unhappy friend, and possibly of the former occupants and owners of the deserted and now destroyed house. I do not despair of yet bringing about such a search, and it is a source of deep grief to me that it had been delayed by the undeserved hostility and unwise incredulity of the family and friends of late Judge Vey. Colonel McArdle died in Frankfurt on the 13th day of December in the year 1879. And that was The Spook House by Ambrose Pierce. This was published way back in July 7th, 1889. Man, talk about like such a long time ago. Isn't that just like crazy? To think that there's just all these amazing classic horror stories that, exist out there, and a lot of them now are part of the public domain. Man, I'll tell you what, cool little story. I really like that. I hope you did too. Let me know what else you want to read. No. Let me know what else you want to see. Take care. The Haunted Hotel, A Mystery of Modern Venice by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 1. In the year 1860, the reputation of Dr. Wybrow as a London physician reached its highest point. It was reported on good authority that he was in receipt of one of the largest incomes derived from the practice of medicine in modern times. One afternoon, towards the close of the London season, the doctor had just taken his luncheon, after a specially hard morning's work, in his consulting room, and with a formidable list of visits to patients at their own houses to fill up the rest of his day, when the servant announced that a lady wished to speak to him. "Who is she?" the doctor asked. "A stranger?" "Yes, sir." "I see no strangers out of consulting hours. Tell her what the hours are, and send her away." "I have told her, sir." "Well?" "And she won't go." "Won't go?" The doctor smiled as he repeated the words. He was a humorist in his way, and there was an absurd side to the situation which rather amused him. "Has this obstinate lady given you her name?" he inquired. "No, sir. She refused to give any name. She said she wouldn't keep you 5 minutes, and the matter was too important to wait till tomorrow." There she is in the consulting room, and how to get her out again is more than I know." Dr. Wybrow considered for a moment. His knowledge of women, professionally speaking, rested on the ripe experience of more than 30 years. He had met with them in all their varieties, especially the variety which knows nothing of the value of time, and never hesitates at sheltering itself behind the privileges of its sex. A glance at his watch informed him that he must soon begin his rounds among the patients who were waiting for him at their own houses. He decided forthwith on taking the only wise course that was open under the circumstances. In other words, he decided on taking to flight. "Is the carriage at the door?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Very well. Open the house door for me without making any noise, and leave the lady in undisturbed possession of the consulting room. When she gets tired of waiting, you know what to tell her. If she asks when I am expected to return, say that I dine at my club and spend the evening at the theatre. Now then, softly, Thomas. If your shoes creak, I am a lost man." He noiselessly led the way into the hall, followed by the servant on tiptoe. Did the lady in the consulting room suspect him? Or did Tomas's shoes creak, and was her sense of hearing unusually keen? Whatever the explanation may be, the event that actually happened was beyond all doubt. Exactly as Dr. Wybrow passed his consulting room, the door opened. The lady appeared on the threshold and laid her hand on his arm. "I entreat you, sir, not to go away without letting me speak to you first." The accent was foreign. The tone was low and firm. Her fingers closed gently and yet resolutely on the doctor's arm. Neither her language nor her action had the slightest effect in inclining him to grant her request. The influence that instantly stopped him on the way to his carriage was the silent influence of her face. The startling contrast between the corpse-like pallor of her complexion and the overpowering life and light. The glittering metallic brightness in her large black eyes held him literally spellbound. She was dressed in dark colors, with perfect taste. She was of middle height and, apparently, of middle age, say a year or two over 30. Her lower features, the nose, mouth, and chin, possessed the fineness and delicacy of form which is often seen among women of foreign races than among women of English birth. She was unquestionably a handsome person, with the one serious drawback of her ghastly complexion, and with the less noticeable defect of a total want of tenderness in the expression of her eyes. Apart from his first emotion of surprise, the feeling she produced in the doctor may be described as an overpowering feeling of professional curiosity. The case might prove to be something entirely new in his professional experience. It looks like it, he thought, and it's worth waiting for. She perceived that she had produced a strong impression of some kind upon him and dropped her hold on his arm. "You have comforted many miserable women in your time," she said. "Comfort one more, today." Without waiting to be answered, she led the way back into the room. The doctor followed her and closed the door. He placed her in the patient's chair, opposite the windows. Even in London, the sun, on that summer afternoon, was dazzlingly bright. The radiant light flowed in on her. Her eyes met it unflinchingly with the steely steadiness of the eyes of an eagle. The smooth pallor of her unwrinkled skin looked more fearfully white than ever. For the first time, for many a long year past, the doctor felt his pulse quicken its beat in the presence of a patient. Having possessed herself to his attention, she appeared, strangely enough, to have nothing to say to him. A curious apathy seemed to have taken possession of this resolute woman. Forced to speak first, the doctor merely inquired, in the conventional phrase, what he could do for her. The sound of his voice seemed to rouse her. Still looking straight at the light, she said abruptly, "I have a painful question to ask." "What is it?" Her eyes traveled slowly from the window to the doctor's face. Without the slightest outward appearance of agitation, she put the painful question in these extraordinary words. "I want to know, if you please, whether I am in danger of going mad." Some men might have been amused, and some might have been alarmed. Dr. Wybrow was only conscious of a sense of disappointment. Was this the rare case that he had anticipated, judging rashly by appearances? Was the new patient only a hypochondriacal woman, whose malady was a disordered stomach, and whose misfortune was a weak brain? "Why do you come to me?" he asked sharply. "Why don't you consult a doctor whose special employment is the treatment of the insane?" She had her answer ready, on the instant. "I don't go to a doctor of that sort," she said, "for the very reason that he is a specialist. He has the fatal habit of judging everybody by lines and rules of his own laying down. I come to you because my case is outside of all lines and rules, because you are famous in your profession for the discovery of mysteries and disease. Are you satisfied?" He was more than satisfied. His first idea had been the right idea, after all. Besides, she was correctly informed as to his professional position. The capacity which had raised him to fame and fortune was his capacity, unrivaled among his brethren, for the discovery of remote disease. "I am at your disposal," he answered. "Let me try if I can find out what is the matter with you." He put his medical questions. They were promptly and plainly answered, and they led to no other conclusion than that the strange lady was, mentally and physically, in excellent health. Not satisfied with questions, he carefully examined the great organs of life. Neither his hand nor his stethoscope could discover anything that was amiss. With the admirable patience and devotion to his art which had distinguished him from the time when he was a student, he still subjected her to one test after another. The result was always the same. Not only was there no tendency to brain disease, there was not even a perceptible derangement of the nervous system. "I can find nothing the matter with you," he said. "I can't even account for the extraordinary pallor of your complexion. You completely puzzle me." "The pallor of my complexion is nothing," she answered a little impatiently. "In my early life, I had a narrow escape from death by poisoning. I have never had a complexion since, and my skin is so delicate, I cannot paint without producing a hideous rash. But that is of no importance. I wanted your opinion given positively. I believed in you, and you have disappointed me." Her head dropped on her breast. "And so it ends," she said to herself bitterly. The doctor's sympathies were touched. Perhaps it might be more correct to say that his professional pride was a little hurt. "It may end in the right way yet," he remarked, "if you choose to help me." She looked up again with flashing eyes. "Speak plainly," she said. "How can I help you?" "Plainly, madam, you come to me as an enigma, and you leave me to make the right guess by the unaided efforts of my art. My art will do much, but not all. For example, something must have occurred, something quite unconnected with the state of your bodily health, to frighten you about yourself, or you would never have come here to consult me. Is that true?" She clasped her hands in her lap. "That is true," she said eagerly. "I begin to believe in you again." "Very well. You can't expect me to find out the moral cause which has alarmed you. I can positively discover that there is no physical cause of alarm, and, unless you admit to me your confidence, I could do no more." She rose and took a turn in the room. "Suppose I tell you," she said. "But mind, I shall mention no names." "There is no need to mention names. The facts are all I want." "The facts are nothing," she rejoined. "I have only my own impressions to confess, and you will very likely think me a fanciful fool when you hear what they are. No matter, I will do my best to content you. I will begin with the facts that you want. Take my word for it, they won't do much to help you." She sat down again. In the plainest possible words, she began the strangest and wildest confession that had ever reached the doctor's ears. "It is one fact, sir, that I am a widow," she said. "It is another fact that I am going to be married again." There she paused, and smiled at some thought that occurred to her. Dr. Wybrow was not favourably impressed by her smile. There was something at once sad and cruel in it. It came slowly, and it went away suddenly. He began to doubt whether he had been wise in acting on his first impression. His mind reverted to the commonplace patients and the discoverable maladies that were waiting for him, with a certain tender regret. The lady went on. "My approaching marriage," she said, "has one embarrassing circumstance connected with it. The gentleman whose wife I am to be was engaged to another lady when he happened to meet with me abroad. That lady, mind, being of his own blood and family, related to him as his cousin. I have innocently robbed her of her lover and destroyed her prospects in life. Innocently, I say, because he told me nothing of his engagement until after I had accepted him. When we next met in England, and when there was danger, no doubt, of the affair coming to my knowledge, he told me the truth. I was naturally indignant. He had his excuse ready. He showed me a letter from the lady herself, releasing him from his engagement. A more noble, a more high-minded letter. I never read in my life. I cried over it. I, who have no tears in me for sorrows of my own. If the letter had left him any hope of being forgiven, I would have positively refused to marry him. But the firmness of it, without anger, without a word of reproach, with heartfelt wishes even for his happiness, the firmness of it, I say, left him no hope. He appealed to my compassion. He appealed to his love for me. You know what women are. I, too, was soft-hearted. I said, 'Very well, yes. In a week more, I tremble as I think of it, we ought to be married.' She did really tremble. She was obliged to pause and compose herself before she could go on. The doctor, waiting for more facts, began to fear that he stood committed to a long story. "Forgive me for reminding you that I have suffering persons waiting to see me," he said. "The sooner you can come to the point, the better for my patients and for me." The strange smile, at once so sad and so cruel, showed itself again on the lady's lips. "Every word I have said is to the point," she answered. "You will see it yourself in a moment more." She resumed her narrative. "Yesterday, you need fear no long story, sir. Only yesterday I was among the visitors at one of your English luncheon parties. A lady, a perfect stranger to me, came in late, after we had left the table and had retired to the drawing-room. She happened to take a chair near me, and we were presented to each other. I know her by name, as she knew me. It was the woman whom I had robbed of a lover, the woman who had written the noble letter. Now, listen. You were impatient with me for not interesting you in what I'd just said now. I said it to satisfy your mind that I had no enmity of feeling towards the lady on my side. I admired her. I felt for her. I had no cause to reproach myself. This is very important, as you will presently see. On her side I have reason to be assured that the circumstances had been truly explained to her, and that she understood I was in no way to blame. Now, knowing all these necessary things as you do, explain to me, if you can, why, when I rose and met that woman's eyes looking at me, I turned cold from head to foot, and shuddered and shivered, and knew what a deadly panic of fear was for the first time in my life." The doctor began to feel interested at last. "Was there anything remarkable in the lady's personal appearance?" he asked. "Nothing whatever," was the vehement reply. "Here is the true description of her. The ordinary English lady, the clear cold blue eyes, the fine rosy complexion, the inanimately polite manner, the large good-humoured mouth, the 2 plump cheeks and chin, these and nothing more." "Was there anything in her expression, when you first looked at her, that took you by surprise?" "There was natural curiosity to see the woman who had been preferred to her, and perhaps some astonishment also, not to see a more engaging and more beautiful person, both whose feelings restrained within the limits of good breeding, and both not lasting for more than a few moments, so far as I could see, I say, so far, because the horrible agitation that she communicated to me disturbed my judgment. If I could have got to the door, I would have run out of the room. She frightened me so. I was not even able to stand up. I sank back in my chair. I stared horror-struck at the calm blue eyes that were only looking at me with a gentle surprise. To say they affected me like the eyes of a serpent is to say nothing. I felt her soul in them, looking into mine, looking, if such a thing can be, unconsciously to her own mortal self. I tell you my impression, in all its horror and in all its folly. That woman is destined, without knowing it herself, to be the evil genius of my life. Her innocent eyes saw hidden capabilities of wickedness in me that I was not aware of myself, until I felt them stirring under her look. If I commit faults in my life to come, if I am even guilty of crimes, she will bring the retribution, without, as I firmly believe, any conscious exercise of her own will. In one indescribable moment I felt all this, and I suppose my face showed it. The good, artless creature was inspired by a sort of gentle alarm for me. Am I afraid the heat of the room is too much for you? Will you try my smelling bottle? I heard her say those kind words, and I remembered nothing else. I fainted. When I recovered my senses, the company had all gone. Only the lady of the house was with me. For the moment, I could say nothing to her. The dreadful impression that I have tried to describe to you came back to me with the coming back of my life. As soon as I could speak, I implored her to tell me the whole truth about the woman whom I had supplanted. You see, I had a faint hope that a good character might not really be deserved, that a noble letter was a skilful piece of hypocrisy. In short, that she secretly hated me, and was cunning enough to hide it. No! The lady had been a friend from girlhood, was as familiar with her as if they had been sisters, knew her positively to be as good, as innocent, as incapable of hating anybody, as the greatest saint that ever lived. My one last hope, that I had only felt an ordinary forewarning of danger in the presence of an ordinary enemy, was a hope destroyed for ever. There was one more effort I could make, and I made it. I went next to the man whom I had to marry. I implored him to release me from my promise. He refused. I declared I would break my engagement. He showed me letters from his sisters, letters from his brothers, and his dear friends, all entreating him to think again before he made me his wife, all repeating reports of me in Paris, Vienna, and London, which are so many vile lies. If you refuse to marry me, he said, you admit that these reports are true. You admit that you were afraid to face society in the character of my wife. What could I answer? There was no contradicting him. He was plainly right. If I persisted in my refusal, the utter destruction of my reputation would be the result. I consented to let the wedding take place as we had arranged it, and left him. The night has passed. I am here, with my fixed conviction that innocent woman is ordained to have a fatal influence over my life. I am here with my one question to put to the one man who can answer it. For the last time, sir, what am I? A demon who has seen the avenging angel, or only a poor mad woman misled by the delusion of a deranged mind? Dr. Wybrow rose from his chair, determined to close the interview. He was strongly and painfully impressed by what he had heard. The longer he had listened to her, the more irresistibly the conviction of the woman's wickedness had forced itself on him. He had tried vainly to think of her as a person to be pitied, a person with a morbidly sensitive imagination, conscious of the capacities for evil which lie dormant in us all, and striving earnestly to open her heart to the counter-influence of her own better nature. The effort was beyond him. A perverse instinct in him said, as if in words, "Beware how you believe in her." "I have already given you my opinion," he said. "There is no sign of your intellect being deranged, or being likely to be deranged, that medical science can discover. As I understand it, as for the impressions you have confided to me, I can only say that yours is a case, as I venture to think, for spiritual rather than for medical advice. Of one thing be assured. What you have said to me in this room shall not pass out of it. Your confession is safe in my keeping." She heard him, with a certain dogged resignation, to the end. "Is that all?" she asked. "That is all," he answered. She put a little paper packet of money on the table. "Thank you, sir. There is your fee." With those words she rose. Her wild black eyes looked upward, with an expression of despair so defiant and so horrible in its silent agony that the doctor turned away his head, unable to endure the sight of it. The bare idea of taking anything from her, not money only, but anything even that she had touched, suddenly revolted him. Still without looking at her, he said, "Take it back. I don't want my fee." She neither heeded nor heard him. Still looking upward, she said slowly to herself, "Let the end come. I have done with the struggle. I submit." She drew her veil over her face, bowed to the doctor, and left the room. He rang the bell, and followed her into the hall. As the servant closed the door on her, a sudden impulse of curiosity, utterly unworthy of him and at the same time utterly irresistible, sprang up in the doctor's mind. Blushing like a boy, he said to the servant, "Follow her home, and find out her name." For one moment the man looked at his master, doubting if his own ears had not deceived him. Dr. Wybrow looked back at him in silence. The submissive servant knew what silence meant. He took his hat and he hurried into the street. The doctor went back to the consulting room. A sudden revulsion of feelings swept over his mind. Had the woman left an infection of wickedness in the house, and had he caught it? What devil had possessed him to degrade himself in the eyes of his own servant? He had behaved infamously. He had asked an honest man, a man who had served him faithfully for years, to turn spy. Stung by the bare thought of it, he ran out into the hall again and opened the door. The servant had disappeared. It was too late to call him back. But one refuge from his contempt for himself was now open to him, the refuge of work. He got into his carriage and went his rounds among his patients. If the famous physician could have shaken his own reputation, he would have done it that afternoon. Never before had he made himself so little welcome at the bedside. Never before had he put off until tomorrow the prescription which ought to have been written, the opinion which ought to have been given today. He went home earlier than usual, unutterably dissatisfied with himself. The servant had returned. Dr. Wybrow was ashamed to question him. The man reported the result of his errand without waiting to be asked. "The lady's name is the Countess Narona. She lives at—" Without waiting to hear where she lived, the doctor acknowledged the all-important discovery of her name by a silent bend of the head, and entered his consulting room. The fee that he had vainly refused still lay in its little white paper covering on the table. He sealed it up in an envelope, addressed it to the poor box of the nearest police court, and, calling the servant in, directed him to take it to the magistrate the next morning. Faithful to his duties, the servant waited to ask the customary question, "Do you dine at home today, sir?" After a moment's hesitation, he said, "No, I shall dine at the club." The most easily deteriorated of all the moral qualities is the quality called conscience. In one state of a man's mind, his conscience is the severest judge that can pass sentence on him. In another state, he and his conscience are on the best possible terms with each other in the comfortable capacity of accomplices. When Dr. Wybrow left his house for the second time, he did not even attempt to conceal from himself that his sole objective in dining at the club was to hear what the world said of the Countess Narona. There was a time when a man in search of the pleasures of gossip sought the society of ladies. The man knows better now. He goes to the smoking room of his club. Dr. Wybrow lit his cigar, and looked round him at his brethren in social conclave assembled. The room was well filled, but the flow of talk was still languid. The doctor innocently applied the stimulant that was wanted. When he inquired if anybody knew the Countess Nerona, he was answered by something like a shout of astonishment. Never, the conclave agreed, had such an absurd question been asked before. Every human creature with the slightest claim to a place in society knew the Countess Nerona. An adventuress with a European reputation of the blackest possible colour. Such was the general description of the woman with the death-like complexion and the glittering eyes. Descending to particulars, each member of the club contributed his own little stock of scandal to the memoirs of the Countess. It was doubtful whether she was really what she called herself, a Dalmatian lady. It was doubtful whether she had ever been married to the Count whose widow she assumed to be. It was doubtful whether the man who accompanied her in her travels, under the name of Baron Rivar, and in the character of her brother, was her brother at all. Report pointed to the Baron as a gambler at every table on the continent. Report whispered that his so-called sister had narrowly escaped being implicated in a famous trial for poisoning at Vienna. That she had been known at Milan as a spy in the interests of Austria. That her apartment in Paris had been denounced to the police as nothing less than a private gambling house. And that her present appearance in England was the natural result of the discovery. Only one member of the assembly in the smoking room that took the part of this much-abused woman, and declared that her character had been most cruelly and most unjustly assailed. But as the man was a lawyer, his interference went for nothing. It was naturally attributed to the spirit of contradiction inherent in his profession. He was asked derisively what he thought of the circumstance under which the Countess had become engaged to be married, and he made the characteristic answer, that he thought the circumstances highly creditable to both parties, and that he looked on the lady's future husband as a most enviable man. Hearing this, the doctor raised another shout of astonishment by inquiring the name of the gentleman whom the Countess was about to marry. His friends in the smoking room decided unanimously that the celebrated physician must be a second Rip Van Winkle, and that he had just awakened from a supernatural sleep of 20 years. It was all very well to say that he was devoted to his profession, and that he had neither time nor inclination to pick up fragments of gossip at dinner parties and balls. A man who did not know that the Countess Nerona had borrowed money at Homburg of no less a person than Lord Montbarry, and had then deluded him into making her a proposal of marriage, was a man who had probably never heard of Lord Montbarry himself. The younger members of the club, humouring the joke, sent a waiter for the peerage, and read aloud the memoir of the nobleman in question, for the doctor's benefit, with illustrative morsels of information interpolated by themselves. Herbert John Westwick, 1st Baron Montbarry of Mantbury, King's County, Ireland, created a peer for distinguished military services in India, born 1812, 48 years old, doctor at the present time, not married, will be married next week, doctor to the delightful creature we have been talking about. Heir presumptive his lordship's annexed brother, Stephen Robert, married to Ella, youngest daughter of the Reverend Silas Marden, rector of Runnygate, and has issue 3 daughters, younger brothers of his lordship, Francis and Henry, unmarried, sisters of his lordship, Lady Barville, married to Sir Theodore Bart, and Anne, widow of the late Peter Norbury, Esquire, of Norbury Cross. Bear his lordship's relations well in mind, Doctor. 3 brothers Westwick, Stephen, Francis, and Henry, and 2 sisters, Lady Barville and Mrs. Norbury. Not one of the 5 will be present at the marriage, and not one of the 5 will leave a stone unturned to stop it. If the Countess will only give them a chance, add to these hostile members of the family another offended relative not mentioned in the peerage, a young lady. A sudden outburst of protest in more than one part of the room stopped the coming disclosure and released the doctor from further persecution. "Don't mention the poor girl's name. It's too bad to make a joke of that part of the business. She has behaved nobly under shameful provocation. There is but one excuse for Montbarry. He is either a madman or a fool." In these terms, the protest expressed itself on all sides. Speaking confidentially to his next neighbour, the doctor discovered that the lady referred to was already known to him, through the Countess's confession, as the lady deserted by Lord Montbarry. Her name was Agnes Lockwood. She was described as being the superior of the Countess in personal attraction, and as being also by some years the younger woman of the 2. Making all allowance for the follies that men committed every day in their relations with women, Montbarry's delusion was still the most monstrous delusion on record. In this expression of opinion every man present agreed, the lawyer even included. Not one of them could call to mind the innumerable instances in which the sexual influence has proved irresistible in the persons of women without even the pretension to beauty. The very members of the club whom the Countess, in spite of her personal disadvantages, could have most easily fascinated, if she had thought it worth her while, were the members who wondered most loudly at Montbarry's choice of wife. While the topic of the Countess's marriage was still the one topic of conversation, a member of the club entered the smoking room whose appearance instantly produced a dead silence. Dr. Wybrow's next neighbour whispered to him, "Montbarry's brother, Henry Westwick." The newcomer looked round him slowly, with a bitter smile. "You're all talking of my brother," he said. "Don't mind me. Not one of you can despise him more heartily than I do. Go on, gentlemen, go on." But one man present took the speaker at his word. That man was the lawyer who had already undertaken the defence of the Countess. "I stand alone in my opinion," he said, "and I am not ashamed of repeating it in anybody's hearing. I consider the Countess Nerona to be a cruelly treated woman. Why shouldn't she be Lord Montbarry's wife? Who can say she has a mercenary motive in marrying him?" Montbarry's brother turned sharply on the speaker. "I say it," he answered. The reply might have shaken some men. The lawyer stood on his ground as firmly as ever. "I believe I am right," he rejoined, "in stating that his lordship's income is not more than sufficient to support his station in life. Also that it is an income derived almost entirely from landed property in Ireland, every acre of which is entailed." Montbarry's brother made a sign, admitting that he had no objection to offer so far. "If his lordship dies first," the lawyer proceeded, "I have been informed that the only provision he can make for his widow consists in a rent charge on the property of no more than 400 a year. His retiring pension and allowances, it is well known, die with him. 400 a year is therefore all that he can leave to the Countess, if he leaves her a widow." "400 a year is not all," was the reply to this. "My brother has insured his life for £10,000, and he has settled the whole of it on the Countess, in the event of his death." This announcement proved a strong sensation. Men looked at each other and repeated the three startling words, £10,000. Driven fairly to the wall, the lawyer made a last effort to defend his position. "May I ask who made that settlement a condition of the marriage?" he said. "Surely it was not the Countess herself?" Henry Westwick answered, "It was the Countess's brother," and added, "which comes to the same thing." After that, there was no more to be said, so long, at least, as Montbarry's brother was present. The talk flowed into other channels, and the doctor went home. But his morbid curiosity about the Countess was not set at rest yet. In his leisure moments, he found himself wondering whether Lord Montbarry's family would succeed in stopping the marriage after all. And more than this, he was conscious of a growing desire to see the infatuated man himself. Every day during the brief interval before the wedding, he looked in at the club on the chance of hearing some news. Nothing had happened, so far as the club knew. The Countess's position was secure. Montbarry's resolution to be her husband was unshaken. They were both Roman Catholics, and they were to be married at the L in Spanish Place. So much the doctor discovered about them, and no more. On the day of the wedding, after a feeble struggle with himself, he actually sacrificed his patients and their guineas, and slipped away secretly to see the marriage. To the end of his life, he was angry with anybody who reminded him of what he had done on that day. The wedding was strictly private. A closed carriage stood at the church door. A few people, mostly of the lower class, and mostly old women, were scattered about the interior of the building. Here and there Dr. Wybrow detected the faces of some of his brethren of the club, attracted by curiosity, like himself. 4 persons only stood before the altar, the bride and bridegroom and their 2 witnesses. One of these last was an elderly woman, who might have been the Countess's companion or maid. The other was undoubtedly her brother, Baron Rivar. The bridal party, the bride herself included, wore their ordinary morning costume. Lord Montbarry, personally viewed, was a middle-aged military man of the ordinary type. Nothing in the least remarkable distinguished him in either face or figure. Baron Rivar, again, in his way, was another conventional representative of another well-known type. One sees his finely pointed moustache, his bold eyes, his crisply curling hair, and his dashing carriage of the head, repeated hundreds of times over on the boulevards of Paris. The only noteworthy point about him was of the negative sort. He was not in the least like his sister. Even the officiating priest was only a harmless, humble-looking old man, who went through his duties resignedly, and felt visible rheumatic difficulties every time he bent his knees. The one remarkable person, the Countess herself, only raised her veil at the beginning of the ceremony and presented nothing in her plain dress that was worth a second look. Never, on the face of it, was there a less interesting and less romantic marriage than this. From time to time, the doctor glanced around at the door or up at the galleries, vaguely anticipating the appearance of some protesting stranger, in possession of some terrible secret, commissioned to forbid the progress of the service. Nothing in the shape of an event occurred. Nothing extraordinary, nothing dramatic. Bound fast together, as man and wife, the two disappeared, followed by their witnesses, to sign the registers, and still Dr. Wybrow waited, and still he cherished the obstinate hope that something worth seeing must certainly happen yet. The interval passed, and the married couple, returning to the church, walked together down the nave to the door. Dr. Wybrow drew back as they approached. To his confusion and surprise, the Countess discovered him. He said her say to her husband, "One moment, I see a friend." Lord Montbarry bowed and waited. She stepped up to the doctor, took his hand and wrung it hard. He felt her overpowering black eyes looking at him through her veil. "One step more, you see, on the way to the end." She whispered those strange words and returned to her husband. Before the doctor could recover himself and follow her, Lord and Lady Montbarry had stepped into their carriage and had driven away. Outside the church door stood the 3 or 4 members of the club who, like Dr. Wybrow, had watched the ceremony out of curiosity. Near them was the bride's brother, waiting alone. He was evidently bent on seeing the man whom his sister had spoken to in broad daylight. His bold eyes rested on the doctor's face with a momentary flash of suspicion in them. The cloud suddenly cleared away. The Baron smiled with charming courtesy, lifted his hat to his sister's friend, and walked off. The members constituted themselves into a club conclave on church steps. They began with the Baron. "Damned ill-looking rascal." They went on with Montbarry. "Is he going to take that horrid woman with him to Ireland?" "Naughty, he can't face the tenantry. They know about Agnes Lockwood." "Well, but where is he going?" "To Scotland." "Does she like that?" "It's only for a fortnight. They come back to London and go abroad." "And they will never return to England, eh?" "Who can tell? Did you see how she looked at Montbarry when she had to lift her veil at the beginning of the service? In his place, I should have bolted. Did you see her, Doctor?" By this time, Dr. Wybrow had remembered his patients, and had heard enough of the club gossip. He followed the example of Baron Rivar and walked off. "One step more, you see, on the way to the end," he repeated himself on his way home. What end? On the day of the marriage, Agnes Lockwood sat alone in the little drawing-room of her London lodgings, burning the letters which had been written to her by Montbarry in the bygone time. The Countess's maliciously smart description of her, addressed to Dr. Wybrow, had not even hinted at the charm that most distinguished Agnes, the artless expression of goodness and purity which instantly attracted everyone who approached her. She looked by many years younger than she really was. With her fair complexion and her shy manner, it seemed only natural to speak of her as a girl, although she was now really advancing towards 30 years of age. She lived alone, with an old nurse devoted to her, on a modest little income which was just enough to support the two. There were none of the ordinary signs of grief in her face, as she slowly tore the letters of her false lover in two, and threw the pieces into the small fire which had been lit to consume them. Unhappily for herself, she was one of those women who feel too deeply to find relief in tears. Pale and quiet, with cold trembling fingers, she destroyed the letters one by one, without daring to read them again. She had torn the last of the series, and was still shrinking from throwing it after the rest into the swiftly destroying flame, when the old nurse came in, and asked if she would see Master Henry, meaning the youngest member of the Westwick family, who had publicly declared his contempt for his brother in the smoking room of the club. Agnes hesitated. A faint tinge of colour stole over her face. There had been a long past time when Henry Westwick had owned that he loved her. She had made her confession to him, acknowledging that her heart was given to his eldest brother. He had submitted to his disappointment, and they had met thenceforth as cousins and friends. Never before had she associated the idea of him with embarrassing recollections, but now, on the very day when his brother's marriage to another woman had consummated his brother's treason towards her, there was something vaguely repellent in the prospect of seeing him. The old nurse, who remembered them both in their cradles, observed her hesitation, and sympathizing, of course, with the man, put in a timely word for Henry. "He says he's going away, my dear, and he only wants to shake hands and say goodbye." This plain statement of the case had its effect. Agnes decided on receiving her cousin. He entered the room so rapidly that he surprised her in the act of throwing the fragments of Montbarry's last letter into the fire. She hurriedly spoke first. "You were leaving London very suddenly, Henry. Is it business or pleasure?" Instead of answering her, he pointed to the flaming letter, and to some black ashes of burnt paper lying lightly in the lower part of the fireplace. "Are you burning letters?" "Yes." "His letters?" "Yes." He took her hand gently. "I had no idea I was intruding on you, at a time when you must wish to be alone. Forgive me, Agnes, I shall see you when I return." She signed to him, with a faint smile, to take a chair. "We have known one another since we were children," she said. "Why should I feel a foolish pride about myself in your presence? Why should I have any secrets from you? I sent back all your brother's gifts to me some time ago. I have been advised to do more, to keep nothing that can remind me of him, in short, to burn his letters. I have taken the advice, but I own I shrank a little from destroying the last of the letters. No, not because it was the last, but because it had this in it." She opened her hand, and showed him a lock of Montbarry's hair, tied with a morsel of golden cord. Well, let it go with the rest." She dropped it into the flame. For a while she stood with her back to Henry, leaning on the mantelpiece and looking into the fire. He took the chair to which she had pointed, with a strange contradiction of expression in his face. The tears were in his eyes, while the brows above were knit close in an angry frown. He muttered to himself, "Damn him!" She rallied her courage, and looked at him again when she spoke. "Well, Henry, and why are you going away?" "I am out of spirits, Agnes, and I want a change." She paused before she spoke again. His face told her plainly that he was thinking of her when he made that reply. She was grateful to him, but her mind was not with him. Her mind was still with the man who had deserted her. She turned round again to the fire. "Is it true," she asked, after a long silence, "that they have been married today?" He answered ungraciously in the one necessary word, "Yes." "Did you go to the church?" He resented the question with an expression of indignant surprise. "Go to the church," he repeated. "I would as soon go to—" He checked himself there. "How can you ask?" he added in lower tones. "I have never spoken to Montbarry. I have not even seen him, since he treated you like the scoundrel and the fool that he is." She looked at him suddenly without saying a word. He understood her, and begged her pardon. But he was still angry. "The reckoning comes to some men," he said, "even in this world. We will live to rue the day when he married that woman." Agnes took a chair by his side, and looked at him with a gentle surprise. "Is it quite reasonable to be so angry with her, because your brother preferred her to me?" she asked. Henry turned on her sharply. "Do you defend the Countess, of all the people in the world?" "Why not?" Agnes answered. "I know nothing against her. On the only occasion when we met, she appeared to be a singularly timid, nervous person, looking dreadfully ill, and being indeed so ill that she fainted under the heat of my room. Why should we not do her justice? We know that she was innocent of any intention to wrong me. We know that she was not aware of my engagement." Henry lifted his hand impatiently and stopped her. "There is such a thing as being too just and too forgiving," he interposed. "I can't bear to hear you talk in that patient way, after the scandalously cruel manner in which you have been treated. Try to forget them both, Agnes. I wish to God I could help you to do it." Agnes laid her hand on his arm. "You were very good to me, Henry, but you don't quite understand me. I was thinking of myself and my trouble in quite a different way. When you came in, I was wondering whether anything which has so entirely filled my heart, and so absorbed all that is best and truest in me, as my feeling for your brother, can really pass away as if it has never existed. I have destroyed the last visible things that remind me of him. In this world I shall see him no more. But is the tie that once bound us completely broken? Am I as entirely parted from the good and evil fortune of his life if we had never met and never loved? What do you think, Henry? I can hardly believe it." "If you could bring the retribution on him that he has deserved," Henry Westwick answered sternly, "I might be inclined to agree with you." As that reply passed his lips, the old nurse appeared again at the door, announcing another visitor. "I'm sorry to disturb you, my dear, but here is little Mrs. Ferrari wanting to know when she may say a few words to you." Agnes turned to Henry, before she replied. "You remember Emily Bidwell, my favourite pupil years ago at the village school, and afterwards my maid? She left me to marry an Italian courier named Ferrari, and I am afraid it has not turned out very well. Do you mind my having her in here for a minute or two?" Henry rose to take his leave. "I should be glad to see Emily again at any other time," he said, "but it is best that I should go now. My mind is disturbed, Agnes. I might say things to you if I stayed here any longer, which are better not said now. I shall cross the channel by the mail tonight and see how a few weeks' change will help me." He took her hand. "Is there anything else in the world that I can do for you?" he asked very earnestly. She thanked him and tried to release her hand. He held it with a tremulous, lingering grasp. "God bless you, Agnes," he said in faltering tones, with his eyes on the ground. Her face flushed again, and the next instant turned paler than ever. She knew his heart as well as he knew it himself. She was too distressed to speak. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed it fervently, and, without looking at her again, left the room. The nurse hobbled after him to the head of the stairs. She had not forgotten the time when the younger brother had been the unsuccessful rival of the elder for the hand of Agnes. "Don't be downhearted, Master Henry," whispered the old woman, with the unscrupulous common sense of persons in the lower rank of life. "Try her again when you come back." Left alone for a few moments, Agnes took a turn in the room, trying to compose herself. She paused before a little watercolour drawing on the wall, which belonged to her mother. It was her own portrait when she was a child. "How much happier we should be," she thought to herself sadly, "if we never grew up." The courier's wife was shown in, a little meek, melancholy woman, with white eyelashes and watery eyes, who curtsied deferentially and was troubled with a small chronic cough. Agnes shook hands with her kindly. "Well, Emily, what can I do for you?" The courier's wife made rather a strange answer. "I'm afraid to tell you, miss." "Is it such a very difficult favour to grant? Sit down and let me hear how you are going on. Perhaps the petition will slip out while we are talking. How does your husband behave to you?" Emily's light grey eyes looked more watery than ever. She shook her head and sighed resignedly. "I have no positive complaint to make against him, miss, but I'm afraid he doesn't care about me, and he seems to take no interest in his home. I may almost say he's tired of his home. It might be better for both of us, miss, if he went travelling for a while. Not to mention the money, which is beginning to be wanted, sadly." She put her handkerchief to her eyes, and sighed again more resignedly than ever. "I don't quite understand," said Agnes. "I thought your husband had an engagement to take some ladies to Switzerland and Italy." "That was his ill luck, miss. One of the ladies fell ill, and the others wouldn't go without her. They paid him a month's salary as compensation, but they had engaged him for the autumn and winter, and the loss is serious." "I am sorry to hear it, Emily. Let us hope he will soon have another chance." "It's not his turn, miss, to be recommended when the next applications come to the courier's office. You see, there are so many of them out of employment just now. If he could be privately recommended—" She stopped, and left the unfinished sentence to speak for itself. Agnes understood her directly. "You want my recommendation?" she rejoined. "Why couldn't you say so at once?" Emily blushed. "It would be such a chance for my husband," she answered confusedly. "A letter inquiring for a good courier. A 6 months' engagement, miss. Came to the office this morning. It's another man's turn to be chosen, and the secretary will recommend him. If my husband could only send his testimonials by the same post with just a word in your name, miss, it might turn the scale, as they say." "A private recommendation between gentlefolks goes so far." She stopped again and sighed again, and looked down at the carpet as if she had some private reason for feeling a little ashamed of herself. Agnes began to be rather weary of the persistent tone of mystery in which her visitor spoke. "If you want my interest with any friend of mine," she said, "why can't you tell me the name?" The courier's wife began to cry. "I'm ashamed to tell you, miss." For the first time, Agnes spoke sharply. "Nonsense, Emily. Tell me the name directly or drop the subject, whichever you like best." Emily made a last desperate effort. She wrung her handkerchief hard in her lap, and let off the name as if she had been letting off a loaded gun. "Lord Montbarry." Agnes rose and looked at her. "You have disappointed me," she said very quietly, but with a look which the courier's wife had never seen in her face before. "Knowing what you know, you ought to be aware that it is impossible for me to communicate with Lord Montbarry. I always supposed you had some delicacy of feeling. I am sorry to find that I have been mistaken." Weak as she was, Emily had spirit enough to feel the reproof. She walked in her meek, noiseless way to the door. "I beg your pardon, miss. I am not quite so bad as you think me, but I beg your pardon all the same." She opened the door. Agnes called her back. There was something in the woman's apology that appealed irresistibly to her just in generous nature. "Come," she said. "We must not part in this way. Let me not misunderstand you. What is it that you expect me to do?"
Emily was wise enough to answer this time without any reserve. "My husband will send his testimonials, miss, to Lord Montbarry in Scotland. I only wanted you to let him say in his letter that his wife had been known to you since she was a child, and that you feel some little interest in his welfare on that account. I don't ask it now, miss. You have made me understand that I was wrong." Had she really been wrong? Past remembrances as well as present troubles pleaded powerfully with Agnes for the courier's wife. "It seems only a small favour to ask," she said, speaking under the impulse of kindness which was the strongest impulse in her nature. "But I am not sure that I ought to allow my name to be mentioned in your husband's letter. Let me hear again exactly what he wishes to say." Emily repeated the words, and then offered one of those suggestions which have a special value of their own to persons unaccustomed to the use of their pens. "Suppose you try, miss, how it looks in writing." Childish as the idea was, Agnes tried the experiment. "If I let you mention me," she said, "we must at least decide what you were to say." She wrote the words in the briefest and plainest form. "I venture to state that my wife has been known from a childhood to Miss Agnes Lockwood, who feels some little interest in my welfare on that account." Reduced to this one sentence, there was surely nothing in the reference to her name which implied that Agnes had permitted it or that she was even aware of it. After a last struggle with herself, she handed the written paper to Emily. "Your husband must copy it exactly, without altering anything," she stipulated. "On that condition, I grant your request." Emily was not only thankful, she was really touched. Agnes hurried the little woman out of the room. "Don't give me time to repent and take it back again," she said. Emily vanished. "Is the tie that once bound us completely broken? Am I as entirely parted from the good and evil fortune of his life as if we had never met and never loved?" Agnes looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. Not 10 minutes since, those serious questions had been on her lips. It almost shocked her to think of the commonplace manner in which they had already met with their reply. The mail of that night would appeal once more to Montbarry's remembrance of her, in the choice of a servant. 2 days later, the post brought a few grateful items from Emily. Her husband had got the place, Ferrari was engaged, for 6 months certain, as Lord Montbarry's courier.
Everyone's telling scary stories for Halloween, so I'll talk about something that happened to me when I was a kid because, hey, trauma never gets old. Hashtag scary stories. When I turned 9, I realized I could sneak downstairs after everyone was asleep and eat anything I wanted in the fridge. No one ever noticed. I could make a peanut butter, cheese whiz, and mayo sandwich, eat leftover pizza, scrape off the icing from birthday cakes. As long as I was careful, I could do anything. Creeping down was the hardest part. I had to navigate the pitch-dark house all the way downstairs in total darkness, like a tiny ninja. One night in May, 81, we ordered from Fish and Shrimp House. I waited until everyone was asleep and crept downstairs to eat the leftover sweet and sour pork. It took forever. I finally stepped into the totally dark den and let down my guard. All of a sudden I heard a fork click on the counter. I froze. The microwave clock light showed the outline of a man sitting at our kitchen counter. He couldn't see me, but I saw him. A skinny guy, eating our leftovers, and drinking our milk from the carton. Can't explain how terrifying it is for someone to be in your house. I slowly backed away, crept upstairs, and woke up my mom and dad. They made way too much noise, and took way too long, and by the time they got downstairs, the kitchen was empty. Everyone said I read too many horror comics, so they blew off what I said. But no way was I pouring milk on my cereal. I started tracking the position of everything in the kitchen. One day the paper napkin holder was on the wrong side of the counter. Another day a mug was in the sink that was not there the night before. My bedroom door didn't lock, so I kept a steak knife under my pillow. I must have stabbed myself in the hand 1,000 times, checking to make sure it was there. Then in August, I was in my room reading when I looked up. There's an AC vent over my bed. Behind the vent, a pair of eyes were watching me. I freaked and raised hell until my parents searched our attic and the crawl space under our house. Nothing. I wasn't very popular for a few weeks. The last week of August, our house started to smell. One night, rice fell out of the vent over my bed. Maggots. The AC people said something had probably crawled into our vents and died. Turns out what had crawled into our vents and died was the guy. We lived in an old house with lots of space between the walls and big ducts. He'd been living in them since May. At least. He'd put a foam pad beside my bedroom vent so he'd be comfortable while he watched me. The police said he'd made lots of drawings, but when I asked, they pretended they hadn't said anything. No one ever identified him. He was buried as a John Doe. To this day, I can't look inside the vents in houses. But sometimes when I'm at someone's house, I'll smell a little BO coming from their central air conditioning, and I'll wonder who's living back there in their ducts. Who's living in the dark? What a short but still pretty eerie and spooky story by Grady Hendrix. Now, I don't know if I fully believe it. I think it's believable. But, either way, not really important. The fact is, it was good. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. He's got a website. You could support all his actions there. I'll also put in his Twitter handle as well if you want to give him a little follow on there. He does write quite a few scary story based things as well, so that's quite interesting. That's another reason why I don't fully believe it, but don't matter. Either way, really good. So our next stuff that we're going to be thinking about doing is definitely, I'm definitely tempted to cover The Sun Vanished and Dear David. Both are quite long, and The Sun Vanished I think is still ongoing, so that's it's gonna be a time sink. But I'm tempted. I am tempted to do it. If that's what you want, then I'll do it. Just let me know. Otherwise, I do have another longer one coming. A little more in the vein of Gregory 88. Not quite as good, but still good. It is still good, and it's similar in a sense. That one I'm thinking of dropping on Christmas Day, just as a little bonus, a little treat for all you guys, for all your support and all your lovely words. Also, a Santa horror game I think will also be coming out on the 25th. So for those of you that made it to the end of the video, you know what's coming. You know what's coming. Well, that's it from me. See you for the next one. Fuck. The most terrifying thing happened to me earlier. I don't fully understand it, but I am freaking the hell out. Please don't read on if you're not into scary things. This is both graphic and frightening. It's also a pretty long story. So I've talked about how much I love my house. I bought it this summer. It's in the woods of Connecticut, tucked in the crook of 2 lakes. I'm closer to a boat launch than a grocery store and see about 5 to 6 deer a day when I go for my run. Quiet and serene. Or so I thought. It's also very dark at night. Like when the lights in my bedroom are out, it's so dark that my eyes simply don't adjust, no matter how long I've been in the room. Until dawn. I have motion sensor lights right outside my bedroom window, so when a deer wanders by, usually going to headbutt the birdseed out of the feeder, it triggers the light. Scared the shit out of me the first time I noticed it. I was awakened in the middle of the night, opened my eyes to this usually pitch black room flooded with a dim light from the windows. I leaned over to look out, and I could see their eyes glowing back at me, just beyond the reach of the light. Stupid deer. But anyway, back to tonight. I finished editing the Adweek Daily newsletter and went for a later run than usual. The neighborhood I live in is solidly middle class, but if you follow the main road past it, it becomes a steep, winding route down the hillside, thickly forested and without houses, before you reach a private community full of starter mansions. I like to run this route because traffic is infrequent. The hill is a nice challenge, the forest makes me feel all druidic and wild, and when I reach the bottom, I get a nice view of the rich people's private harbor. About halfway down the hill, despite the lack of houses for at least a half mile on either side, there's this weirdly sinister, beat-up gate with police line tape. I've noticed it before, but didn't think much of it until today. Here's me headed down that hill this evening, which I've done dozens of times, taking a silly photo to send to my husband, and then the second one, which I didn't particularly mean to take. Because when I took that photo, I had just heard a desperate, gut-wrenching scream. The scream had come from beyond that gate, apparently just beyond my view at the top of the hill. It sounded like it belonged to an adult man, and it was pleading for help. "Oh God, help! Please, someone help!" And so on, before it descended into a deep, guttering groan. The scream fell silent. I stood there, in the grass by the fence, rooted by that chilling appeal. Had I imagined it? No. No way. I closed the camera and opened the phone app. That person sounded seriously hurt, but I didn't know what I was getting into, so I thought I'd dial 911 while I was checking on them to see if I could help. But I had absolutely no signal. Not unusual out here. I tried the SOS function, but that wasn't working either. The sounds were still coming from over the hill. pleas for help, punctuated by horrible, racking sobs. I called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" Pretty stupid. They had just said they needed help, but I didn't really want to know the answer. My voice came out small and reedy, but despite our apparent distance, they heard it. The response was immediate. "Please, please help. No, no, no." They groaned again, and I heard something else beyond their voice, something I couldn't place. Leaves rustling? It sounded wet. My heart hammering in my chest, I fidgeted nervously for a minute, considered running for a house, but knew it would be a long time before I returned. Maybe I could assess the situation and then go get someone. Maybe there would be better signal at the top of the hill. I squeezed around the gate. "I'm coming," I called. "Just hang on." The leaves dampened my shoes as I trekked up the hill, and I slipped slightly as it steepened. At the crest was a rocky outcrop, and as I rounded it, I found a stone staircase arcing up farther to the right. It's hard to explain, but these stairs didn't look like they belonged there. A trick of the light made them seem sort of copy and pasted onto the hillside. The shadows were all wrong. I took a quick photo, but now there's just a black photo in my library where it should be. But either way, the stone was solid beneath my feet, so I proceeded up their curving length, about 7 long, shallow steps that rounded the rock. At the top I saw nothing. Well, that's not true. I saw what you'd expect. Trees, ferns, bushes, rocks, a blanket of fallen leaves obscuring the forest floor in a small clearing. I couldn't see any houses through the surrounding foliage. It was quiet. Very quiet. The man's pleading voice had faded away as I climbed the stairs. The birds, the wind had gone silent. I could see the yellowing leaves fluttering on the branches above me, but their sound was muted. I felt as if I had entered a snow globe. I scanned the clearing, and in a small voice that sounded distant to my own ears said, "Hello? Are you alright?" In that moment, it hit me like the heat of a blast furnace, a wave of horrendous stench, reeking rot, decay, death. It lit my nerves on fire. It weakened my knees. I gagged and doubled over to retch. That's when I saw something I can't fully explain. Something unlike anything I've ever seen before. Between 2 trees, watching me. It was more or less humanoid, but completely unlike a human in every way. 2 heads taller than me, impossibly thin, no clothing. Corpse pallid skin stretched over a fleshless rib cage. Jutting hip and shoulders affixed to elongated limbs with knotted joints. Distressingly long hands ending in spidery hands with long, broken, yellowed nails. But I noticed 2 other things about it before that. First, its face. Hairless, noseless, with bulging, dead eyes. Blank globes as pale as those of deep-sea creatures. And its jaw. It dangled, slack and loose, almost to its sternum. It was horrible. That wide, gruesome mouth. The gaping, tongueless hole. A gory red-black, seeming to extend into unfathomable depths, edged with long, crooked, yellowing incisors. The jaws stretched wide, intensifying the stench, and thrust its head forward as if to roar. But instead of a roar, that dreadfully desperate voice, the one I heard from the road, emerged from the depths. "Please, no, please, someone help me, help me." The other sound was unmistakable now, also emerging from the cavernous maw. It was sound of wet flesh and muscle being torn and gnawed and slurped. The crunch of bone, punctuating the agonized screams of the victim to which it belonged. The creature took another step, and then another, staggering pace quickening as it advanced upon me. Heart hammering, a rushing in my eyes. I realized I had been standing still, and I needed to get the fuck away. I reeled and made to run, and stopped short as, to my utter, unmitigated horror, I found myself face to face with another one. This one taller, yet more bent, more skeletal, close enough that I could see what looked like age spots clustered on its cadaverous skin, close enough to touch me, close enough to feel its hot breath that stank like a mountain of corpses under a hot sun. It stretched its ghastly, pendulous jaw, blank eyes bulging in its gaunt, noseless skull, and a gut-wrenching scream lanced through the silence. This time I heard a woman, screaming in agony, punctuated by that same stomach-turning gnawing sound, all from that cavern of a mouth. Desperate to evade the creature before me, yet cognizant of the hastening from behind, I stumbled to the right, felt my shoe catch on a rock and sprawled into the wet leaves, hitting the ground hard and leaving a skidding furrow in the leafy coating of the forest floor. I rolled over, and they were there, the one closest to me once again face to face with me, while the other towered above, looking over its companion's shoulder at me, both still emitting that horrible cries of what I can only assume were their prior victims. As the stench of their breath washed over me, a crippling misery took hold of my mind, driving everything else. The despair of people I had never met, who knew they were about to suffer grisly fates carried out by clammy, spidery fingers, crooked teeth, and crushing, sucking maws. I felt pressure. Those bony fingers were groping, prying pressure, trying to dig through my jacket into me. I ineffectually struggled to push them away, feeling a dreamlike weakness as the creature prodded at my gut. Suddenly terror seared white-hot in me, and I thrashed. My foot caught it just below its prominent ribcage, right in what should have been its gut. The wailing cries were cut short as it recoiled for a moment, its jaw flexing, a low death rattle guttering from its throat. This was my moment. I scrambled backward in the wet leaves, and was halted when a long, clammy hand gripped my ankle. I kicked and flailed desperately. The other one was coming around on my right. I thought of my dogs and my husband. I scrambled in the leaves, helplessly gripping at the soil. My fingers grazed a rock. I seized it and flung it gracelessly at the thing holding my ankle. It struck right between its awful dead eyes, and that chittering crescendoed to a screech, but it released my ankle. I turned over, got a foot under me, found another rock, stood and flung it at the other one. This one barely grazed it, but it halted, and I took that moment to pelt back down the hill, only to find out too late that the stairs I had climbed were gone. Instead, the earth dropped steeply down in front of me. I charged down the slope anyway, losing my footing, sliding down the wet, leaf-slicked hill, tripping to land hard on my hands and knees. But when I looked up, I saw the metal gate ahead of me. I heard sodden leaves rustling, rattles punctuated by screams behind me, and that was all the motivation I needed to bolt to my feet and out onto the road and back up the hill. It was a mile back to my house, and I think I broke a personal record getting there. My husband thought I'd been chased by an animal or fallen off a cliff, with my hair and clothes caked in mud and leaves, pale and panting. I had trouble explaining what happened to him, and wrote this to help myself work it out. Honestly, I'm questioning everything. Fuck. Am I losing it? That can't have been real. I went to bed early, thinking only my dogs and blankets could make me feel safe. I'm in my bedroom now, typing this insanely long thread. The motion-activated lights just switched on outside my bedroom window. I don't think those eyes in the darkness belong to deer anymore. Wow. I had no idea this would take off. Thanks so much for your concern. Everyone. I'm still here and as of yet intact, though still pretty freaked out. And the problem isn't exactly solved. Last night was interesting. When the motion sensor light tripped and I saw the eyes, I yelled for my husband, Drew, who clearly thought I had lost my mind when I came home shaking and covered in leaves. Of course, by the time he got to the room and looked out, the eyes were gone. I thought this stuff only happened in movies. He told me it was probably just more deer. I knew it wasn't. Those eyes were pale, massive, softly glowing yet so empty, and it took so much effort to look away. But, given that I was clearly upset, he agreed to come to bed early with me. In the middle of the night, I woke up, the room flooded with light again from the motion sensor. I sat bolt upright, hissed Drew's name, then rolled over to look out the window beside the headboard, and found myself looking directly at one of them. It was right there, crouching to peer in the window through the gap between the blinds and window frame, dead eyes fixed on me, that empty, endless mouth dangling open, twitching slightly. I swear I could hear its low, rattling breath. I let out a strangled cry and scrambled back, tangled in the sheets. Drew was awake at this point and, thank God, looked over at the window and finally saw it too. "What the?" he said, as I dragged him toward the door by the arm. My big mutt Ranger came to the rescue. He's a massive black shepherd mix. He seriously looks like Batman. And he surged up from his bed on the floor with the most intimidating sound I've ever heard him make. A mix between a snarl and a huge booming bark. Ranger charged at the window, put his paws up on the sill and began to bark. Viciously, furiously, saliva flying from his bared teeth, hackles high and bristling. He's such a softy normally. I've never seen or heard him do anything like that before, but he looked ready to kill. The thing outside the window recoiled. Now I'm sure I could hear its alarmed, chittering screech as it staggered away into the darkness. Another one that had been lingering just at the edge of the light, lurching after it. Needless to say, Ranger's getting lots of love and treats today, though he won't stop staring out the window. Any thoughts on what I should do next? People have been calling these Wendigos, skinwalkers, not deer, but I'm not sure. I am not an artist, so hopefully this doesn't look too silly, but this is more or less what they looked like. Thank you all again for the recommendations, identification, theories, and support surrounding my, screaming creature situation. I have a few developments on this situation from yesterday and today, though I don't know exactly how satisfying it'll be. In the light of day, Drew told me in no uncertain terms that he thought I was pretty idiotic for following the voice up the hill, past a private property sign and police tape in the first place. Which is completely fair. But also, I'm not sure I entirely had a choice. Like, I did want to help the person, but I also felt compelled to. Same with the stairs. I felt like something was lulling me, luring me up them. But that's neither here nor there. We have an immediate problem. They came back last night. That's at least 2 nights in a row, and I'm guessing they won't just stop. That is, I'm pretty certain they came back. Something did. I didn't actually have the courage to look. I didn't see them at all during the day yesterday. The first time I saw them on Monday, they were active during daylight, albeit in the evening. I suspect they don't leave their territory, i.e. the area behind the police line gate, except at night. I know these things are afraid of Ranger, so I've been taking him with me, on leash, when I walk around the property. This video is from yesterday, taken after I posted the update. That window is right by the headboard on the side of the bed where I sleep.
I don't know if you can see in this area, see those spots where the dirt's churned up. And then that's the window that they were looking in. You can see how tall they are based on that. I don't know if you can quite see this on camera, but the leaves are kind of churned up. I'm sure it'll be covered up by the end of today.
I assume they're specifically after me because I invaded their territory, but obviously I don't want to risk them hurting Drew or the animals either. So we're trying to figure out how to get them to leave us alone and be prepared if/when they come back. I love my new house, damn it, and I'm not letting these twitchy assholes ruin it for me. I'm still not sure exactly what we're dealing with. Lots of people have suggested Wendigos, skinwalkers, mimics, not deer, etc. I read up on everything mentioned yesterday. Lots of similarities here and there, but differences too. They could, of course, be a variety of one of those cryptids, but I'm tempted to use a distinct name for them. Pointless? Maybe. My first instinct, naturally, was to take an etymological root and call them osteoglots, with Greek elements meaning bony and mouth. In response, Drew told me I was such a dork, and considering his dyslexia, he said they needed a simpler name he could pronounce and remember more easily. Fair. We discussed hollows, devourers, lurchers, gorgers, and gulpers. Open to alternatives. As for the individuals, I'm pretty sure I've only seen 2, so the more upright-looking younger, one I'm calling Tantalus, and the other, which is taller but more stooped and age-spotted, is Pharynx. Yesterday I went with a mixed bag of recommendations for precautions and protection. I sprinkled salt along the windowsills and at outer door frames. I wanted to make a boundary around the whole house, but A, I don't have that much salt, and B, this week has been and continues to be rainy, so I think it would wash away. At #HeyAlexa's recommendation, I got my silverware, a big box of actual silver cutlery. I put some by the window and doors, but maybe I should hang them up? Not sure how effective a salad fork would be against those things. I could use that silver dish somehow? I have some silver necklaces as well, so we've been wearing those. And this iron rose with a sharp spike on it that Drew had a blacksmith make for me at a Ren fair? Can't hurt, right? I didn't have any sage to burn, but I'm going to try to get some at Chai Thukrol's recommendation. Some people suggested calling the police to ask about the police line tape in the woods, but I'm hesitant to do that because the gate has a mangled private property sign on it as well, so I don't exactly want to confess to literal trespassing. Earlier, I saw my neighbors were home-based on the smoke from their chimney. They've had a fire going every day for the past couple of weeks, even though it's been pretty warm. Actually, all of my neighbors have. Anyway, I went over and did my best to not sound completely unhinged when I asked them if they've seen anything strange the past 2 days. It was very warm in the house, and I noticed their 2 outdoor cats were indoors, sitting at the windowsill by a jar filled with big coins. Beth, the lady's name is Beth, said she hadn't seen anything, but she said it in a strange way, her voice oddly flat. She stared at me hard while she said it. I asked if she was sure. "I'm sure I haven't seen anything," Beth said, her tone blunt, almost angry. It took me aback. She's usually very friendly. "But you know," she continued with less intensity, "there are all sorts of things out here at night this time of year." She paused for a moment. "I try not to look outside too much." Beth has to know something. But when I asked her what sorts of things she was worried about, she brushed off the question. "Oh, you know, animals and things. It's the season for it." She clearly wasn't going to fess up, but I suspected I knew what those and things were. When I made to leave, she told me to stay warm and asked if I needed any firewood. It was almost 70 out, so I declined. Plus, we have loads of it. She can literally see it from our house. "You have that fireplace. You should use it," she insisted. Are they afraid of fire? We tried to sleep, in the basement last night. It only has tiny windows, ones they could never fit through. The Lurcher things felt pretty solid and apparently applies to them. I drew the shades down, salted the windowsill, and put some silver spoons along the edge. I'm certain the Lurchers were outside around 2 a.m. though, because Ranger and Ladybird started barking like mad near the windows. I could feel them, I think, choking dread welled within me, lingering for an hour. I couldn't work up the courage to look out, and begged Drew not to. Neither Drew nor I could sleep after that. We watched Great British Bake Off and played video games to stay calm. I tried to work on my next etymology book, but couldn't get much done. Today, I'm totally exhausted. I can't just keep hiding, but I don't have any ideas for what to do differently tonight. I'm going to look into missing people at Eric Doster's recommendation, then try to sleep better, again in the basement, and work on this with a clear head. One thing that's especially worrying me, I really don't think I should have drawn the one that I showed you yesterday. I think that was a mistake. See, I was getting some work for Ad Week done today, went to jot down a note in my notebook that I always keep next to my laptop, and suddenly I realized I had been drawing it again. And again. And again. And again. The motion-activated lights just came on again. That bigger dot of light is from my neighbor's porch in the distance. But the other two? There are just trees and bushes there. Another update. It's been a better day. I've learned some things, made some progress, put away my notebooks and pens in the bottom of the closet so I can't draw anymore. Ripped up those pages. I tried to take everyone's advice and start a fire last night, but it turns out my chimney needs servicing. The damper is stuck. Even Drew couldn't get it open. Most of our firewood was pretty wet too, so it may not have lit. Call the chimney guy, he'll be here on Wednesday. In the meantime, candles. Candles on the windowsills, a candle next to me, while one of us is awake for safety. Drew and I took turns sleeping. Thank God my bestie, Emily Hightower, sends me her homemade candles all the time. I have a bunch, and they smell amazing. The candles suddenly made my space feel like home again. It's such a relief to have their warmth all around. I've also been carrying a lighter with me when I take the dogs out. It feels so tiny in the big, endless blackness, but it's there, and it's bright, and chases away a bit of that cold, helpless terror I've been living with for days. Plus, I think it worked. I did see that one lurcher that I showed you last night, but it was definitely keeping its distance. It was definitely watching me, but I don't think either of them got close to the windows like they did before. Unfortunately, I've determined that the camera that came with my house is well and truly deceased. The darn thing won't even turn on. Plus, if the neighbors know about these things, as I suspect, they clearly haven't captured, or at least publicized, video of them either. Maybe there's a reason for that. In any case, I've ordered another camera, just because I'd like to have one, but it's also coming next week. Biggest development. I've been digging into the history of Candlewood Lake. The Lurchers were close to Candlewood shore when I first encountered them, and they appeared to be coming from the Candlewood side of my house when they visit. It's very pretty in the daylight. I took this last week. Not my neighborhood, but not too far away. It just shows a small segment of the extensive, complexly shaped lake. The Lurchers' territory by the fence is about a half-mile northwest from this vantage point. Candlewood is a massive, human-made lake, the largest in CT, created in 1928 through the construction of several enormous dams and pumps. Huge projects, requiring 1,400 workers over a few years. My former colleague and friend Eric Doster is correct. There was a lot of history there, including towns and former Native American lands bought, stolen, for ridiculously low sums by European colonizers that were flooded when the lake was created. There was a town called Jerusalem, located in the red circle on the map, in what is now the lake. Some residents sold their land to the developers behind the project. Others refused. I can't find any information on what happened to them. Maybe they were forcibly evacuated. Workers also had to dig up and rebury the bodies in Jerusalem's graveyard. One article said laborers were paid $1 per corpse they moved. The creation of the lake began in late February of 1928, and it took a mere 7 months for the lake to be born on September 28th of the same year, according to the Candlewood Lake Authority. So, a month over 94 years ago. Over the following months, many things washed ashore, including remnants from prior Native American residents. Countless arrowheads as well as spearheads, mallets, war axes, adzes, bits of pottery and other implements washed ashore or unearthed during early excavations. As for the people I heard screaming, I found stories about missing persons in my area who could fit the bill. I don't want to go into too much detail because they might reveal my house's location beyond the fact that it's close to Candlewood. As it happens, a lot of people have died in the bodies of water surrounding my house, and not just Candlewood. Like, a disproportionate amount for your average lake. Some are out swimming or boating and drown. Others are reported missing and then found, presumed drowned. Of course, the people I heard screaming from the Lurchers didn't sound like they were drowning, but maybe drowning was simply blamed for their deaths. Maybe a lot of these drowned people simply had some of their remains discarded in the lake by the Lurchers after they finished with them. Still can't get that awful, wet, gnawing, crunching sound out of my head. Then again, these creatures could also live primarily in the lake for all I know. I only felt their skin briefly when the one grabbed my ankle, those horrible, grasping hands. But it was cold. So cold. Like a corpse bloated from a night in chill water. Another interesting tidbit I found. Colonizers learned of and began to emulate a Native American substitute for wax candles made by splitting the inner core of pine logs, filled with pitch and turpentine, into narrow 8-inch strips which burned like small torches. The best pine for this candlewood was plentiful on the mountain, dominating the northern horizon of the present lake, and it came to be known as Candlewood Mountain. This is also what gave the lake its name. Could there be a connection between this candlewood and the fact that the monsters, presumably, don't like fire? Also, remember when I told you that my neighbor had coins in her window? I remembered that I found a box of coins in the crawl space in my wine cellar when I moved in. I'm not sure if it's a counting thing or if it's a silver thing. Don't $half contain silver?
I have this wine cellar in my house, and at the back, I don't know if you can see that door. It's just like a little crawl space, sort of a Harry Potter closet. But in it, I found this, and it has a bunch of $half and a silver spoon in it. Looks like it's bent. I don't know why. But don't these things contain a little bit of like actual silver? I don't know what this means, but I think it belonged to the previous owners.
I know this hasn't been very creepy, so I hope it's not disappointing for people who are here for a scary story. But there was one slightly creepy thing that did happen last night. I sleepwalked, which is very unusual for me. I've occasionally murmured in my sleep, but I've never been much of a somnambulist. But last night when we were in the basement around 1:30 a.m., having gone downstairs after I showed you the photo of the yard, I had dozed off, and Drew said I got up and walked across the room. He said Ranger got upset and followed me, nudging me with his nose. He has herding breeds in him. So he does that when he wants you to go somewhere, like to his food bowl. But Drew said I brushed past him and went up the stairs to the front door, landing, and reached for the handle. I had been having a dream. I didn't actually see anything, just blackness. But I felt so cold, so alone, and I was sure something was watching me. Silence pressed in, yet I could hear something in the distance, something I wanted to hear better. But I didn't want to go toward. I was so confused when I woke up. The door handle still in my hand, the door open a crack, letting in a blast of chilly air. Which, now that I think about it, was odd, because it wasn't supposed to be cold last night. All I knew was that I had no idea how I'd gotten there. Drew was yelling my name, yelling at me to wake up, pulling me away from the door and slamming it, and I was so tired from the previous nights and stressed from everything else that I just dissolved into tears. I hope I can figure out more tomorrow and get them to leave us alone. I'm sorry. I'm not quite ready to talk about what happened last night, and I'm terrified. I'm piecing things together and will hopefully update tomorrow when I feel more myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. Why does the night have to be so deep? Okay. It's a bright, sunny fall day. Feeling alright. A lot has happened. 2 nights have passed since I last updated. The Lurchers have continued to linger around the property. I think I saw an additional 1 or 2 hanging around on Thursday night, but they didn't get closer. The reason I've been having trouble writing about this is because the sleepwalking and those terrible dreams continued. Thursday night, after I updated you, I got up again and did the same thing. Walked to the front door and made to open it. Drew stopped me again. I'm tired. But last night was worse. I was alone. Drew was laid off earlier this month and just got a new job offer. The onboarding for the new gig involved a 2-day training in Massachusetts. 2 nights away. I desperately didn't want him to go, and he didn't want to leave me alone either, but we need him to keep this job. And there are monsters outside my house. Didn't seem like a practical excuse to skip the onboarding. I would have just gone with him, but I didn't want to leave the dogs or cat, and our boarding place was booked up. We talked about calling in a sitter, but for all I know that would put her in danger. He left mid-morning, and I spent the day jumpy as hell. I got through my ad-week work just fine, but the smallest sounds, the neighbor chopping wood outside, a truck delivering a package, my cat chasing a leaf, made me jump, sweaty, and shaky. As a precaution, before Drew left, he helped me figure out how to basically belt my wrist to my bed and move furniture to the exits. I didn't fight back when he tried to stop me, and I woke up easily, so we figured undoing a belt or moving furniture would do the same thing. We were wrong. Night fell. I was cuddling the pets on the sofa in the basement, eating some popcorn, editing the draft of my etymology book with Great British Bake Off on the TV in the background, because it's happy and the scariest part about it is Noel Fielding. The evening felt almost normal. Then I dozed off. I didn't mean to. I don't usually just drop off to sleep sitting up, but I haven't had much sleep and suddenly I was just... The chill blackness pressed in around me, a deep, endless, lonely dark. Palpable silence broke again by something just beyond my hearing. I drifted toward it, dread roiling in my gut, because I knew that the vague, garbled thrum would coalesce into an all-too-familiar death rattle. I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted out. I wanted to go back. I turned, I fled, but found myself moving toward it once again. It was all around me. They were all around me. It was so cold. A sharp pain in my right foot awakened me with a start. I had tripped, scraping my bare toes on... Oh, shit! I had stubbed my toes on the curb outside the gate. I was there, at the side of the road, halfway down the hill where I first heard those harrowing screams. And I could hear them again. Please, please help. No, no, no. A deep moan carrying down the hill. I stood in the grass by the pavement in the deep dark of night, shivering in my leggings and tank top, a cloud-blackened sky melding with the dark canopy above me. There was zero way I was going to go past that gate again. I had no shoes. My feet ached, roughened and raw from the long walk here that I couldn't remember. I had no phone, no light, no one to hear me call for help. I had to get to a house. Any house. Uphill was best. back toward my house, away from the lake. I turned and stepped back onto the pavement to head that way, and saw one of them watching me from the opposite side of the road. Icy terror seized me. It clambered, jerking and twisting its neck, its mouth open and rattling, up the roadside slope on all fours, then stood up to its full height as it approached the road. It was Tantalus, I was sure, the first one I had ever seen. I ran. Up the hill I dashed, no longer cognizant of the ache in my feet, driven only by an animal instinct to escape the predator pursuing me. The hill was steep, so steep, but I flew until another lurcher stepped out of the trees and onto the road ahead. I halted, breath coming in painful, cloudy gasps. It was less than 2 meters away. Another emerged from the trees on the other side of the road opposite its companion. There were 3 of them? And I don't think either of these 2 were pharynx. One was quite a bit smaller, more crooked, its dangling jaw twitching as it chittered at me. The other was the palest I've seen yet. Its corpse-like skin seemed to glow, almost as white as its eyes in the darkness. Which means that there are at least 4 of them. Oh, hell no. Going around them wasn't an option. The trees were thick on either side, the hill sloping sharply upward on one side and sharply downward on the other. Besides, what if there were even more lurking there, waiting for me? The pale one closest to me took a staggering step forward, jaw swinging, as it unleashed a scream from its yawning maw. Another human scream, one I hadn't heard before. This one wordless, raw, ripping from the creature's throat as it had ripped from someone else's. That was all the prompting I needed. I turned again, pelted down the hill. Normally I'm pretty careful about how I run down the hill because it's very steep and my knees are very 30. But this time I pelted down it and felt nothing but the thudding of my own heart. Tantalus was ahead of me, now in the middle of the road. But the road was wide here, and I wasn't going to stop to let the 2 behind me catch up, so I zagged sharply to the left, away from the gate to dash past the lurcher. It lunged for me, impossibly long fingers on impossibly long hands, and long bony arms coming all too close as it shrieked in the man's agonized voice, garbled with that wet flesh-ripping sound I had heard before. I flinched away, dipping to a crouch to avoid its grasping fingers without stopping, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but as I straightened and continued, I turned my head and screamed back at it, a nonsensical roar of terror and adrenaline. And I may be making this up, but I think it looked surprised for the brief moment I bothered to look. But that's good. I could confuse them for a second, I thought. I wonder if they have a sense of humor, came the giddy, illogical panic, a thought as I charged onward, and I laughed aloud, a shrill, unpleasant thing to my own ears. The road arced down the slope before me, long and blessedly empty, but dark, so dark. Behind me, I heard bursts of screams and rattling, grating growls, and to my dismay, the same sounds and the crunch of leaves churned by long legs and fleshless feet in the woods to my left. I sped up and rounded the corner at the bottom of the hill, laying eyes on the blessed lights of one of the enormous estate-like houses along the shore of Candlewood Lake. I could see its still, mirror-black lake beyond the house. I charged ahead onto the expansive grassy lawn. I would run to the door, throw myself against it and bang on it with my fists, and scream until someone woke up and let me in. And failing, that I'd break a window with a rock and climb in. Prison is better than death, right? But I never got there, because from the bushes emerged yet another lurcher staggering into my path. I whirled, seeing the others approaching from behind, spreading out around me with their crooked gait. I screamed for help, but I was still so far away from the darkened house. Why did these damn properties have to be so big? Besides, I couldn't see any cars outside, so for all I knew it was only occupied seasonally, like many of the houses by the lake. I had nowhere to go. The lurchers were advancing, closing the distance between us. I realized with a sinking dread that they were hurting me, and it was pretty obvious where we were going. I retreated in the only direction I could, toward that black, smooth surface. I was still 10 yards away from it, in the grassy, tree-dotted span between 2 of those gigantic houses. Beside the lake, I could see the grass end at a carefully manicured rocky beach of sorts begin. The water stretched away, glassy, black, no moon or stars in its surface. What to do? I had no interest in going toward the water. They were forming an arc around me, 7, 8 of them closing in, driving me toward the water. Screams bursting alternately from their gaping throats, the rattle from the others crescendoing, pressing in. I could try to run between them, but those long, grasping fingers would surely catch me. It was over. I had to choose how I would die. I don't know how she knew I was there, or where she came from. She seemed to appear out of nowhere behind them. One torch, and then another bursting to glowing orange flames in her hands. They illuminated a woman's unruly grey mane of hair, her gnarled tree-root face, her dark simple jacket and jeans. Tiny, bent, and furious, she shouted unintelligibly as she brandished her torches at the Lurchers, slashing the air with them. They shrieked and chittered, recoiling from the flames. Their semicircle around me parted, making her way for her. She turned as she moved toward me. "Back! Back! Away, you filth!" she spat, shrieking as her torches blazed bright and warm. They obeyed, shuffling back from where we now both stood. Thank you," I managed to say, my teeth chattering, heart still pounding, breath still coming fast. "Stupid!" she spat back at me over her shoulder, shooting me a venomous look. "Stupid, stupid girl!" I gaped at her. "Don't just stand there," she ordered. I heard a hint of an accent. Maybe Dutch? "Take one of these." She thrust a torch at me, and despite being taken aback at her tone, I accepted it gratefully. It was a bundle of sticks, tied with twine and with some sort of dark, viscous material coating the top of the sticks, keeping it alight. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The woman thrust her free hand into a fanny pack. Yes, a fanny pack. At her waist, and withdrew a handful of coins, which she scattered in the grass before the Lurchers to our right. One of them cocked its head, bending over to examine them. "Come! Hurry!" She seized my non-torch-bearing wrist and dragged me back the way she came. The Lurchers lingered, rattling softly, just beyond the reach of the light, their glowing eyes upon us as I hurried with her back across the lawn and up the hill. "Aren't we going to go back to your house?" I asked, gesturing at the big house across the lawn. "Eh?" She glanced at it, then barked a cheerless laugh. "That's not my house. Some rich asshole lives there, and probably only in the summer. Come, back to your house. You, know where I live?" She walked quickly despite her bent frame, and in my bare feet it was all I could do to keep up with her, praying my torch would stay alight. "I do," she said. "Hard not to with those Verschrickingen watching you every night." What? I asked. "What do you call them?" she asked sharply. "Lurchers," I said. She grunted. "Lurchers, then. They have been hunting you, calling you." I glanced behind us, seeing two of them following us up the road at a distance. I assumed the rest were nearby beyond my field of view. "Do you know why?" "Probably because you followed their screams like the damn fool you are." I couldn't argue with that. "So you know about these things?" "Yes," she said shortly. "But now is not the time. Keep moving." The adrenaline was wearing off. I was so tired, but she kept our pace strong all the way back to the house. She barged in, through the unlocked front door, which I had apparently unbarred by moving my grandfather's chimney cabinet out of the way. "Thanks," I gasped, winded. "You saved my life." "Yes, I did," she said, thrusting her still burning torch at me, locking the door and moving the cabinet back in front of it. This lady didn't look like much, but she was strong as an ox. "What's your name?" I asked, gripping the torches and staring at her. "Joanna." But this threat is more than enough for one day, and Drew just pulled in the driveway. I'm gonna go catch him up and explain why there's an angry little old lady putting torches on stakes in our front yard. I'll catch you up on the rest tomorrow. We have a plan now. I don't like it, not even a little bit, but it's a plan. Continuing from yesterday. On Friday, or really the wee hours of Saturday morning, after we had made the long trek back to my house, me shivering, hobbling painfully alongside Joanna on my worn feet, her towing me mercilessly after her, the wiry little woman stayed overnight. Ranger and Ladybird, who like strangers but usually bark when they first arrive, treated her like she had lived there her entire life. Joanna, who was adamant about not identifying herself beyond her first name, relit the candles I had out, and placed the still smoldering torches in mason jars on the front porch and by the back door. She didn't seem concerned about the fire hazard. She helped me tend to my scuffed feet, cursing my stupidity all the while. In the light, her hair was a shock of grey, her face thin, brown, twisted in a permanent scowl. I was both intimidated and in complete awe. I was seated at my dining room table, one foot propped on her knee while she ungently cleaned the sole, muttering a constant stream of insults and curses, and I tried to question her about the Lurchers. "Idiot, addle-pated, useless," she snarled. "Yes, okay, I agree, but just like all the others." "Wait, What? Others? I asked. She harumphed, seized my other already tended foot, and produced a length of thin rope from her fanny pack, which upon second glance proved to be more of an adapted leather pouch on a belt that was fanny pack shaped. Realizing with a flash of panic that she intended to tie my ankles together, I protested, but she demanded venomously whether I wanted to go sleepwalking again, and I fell silent and let her do it. She didn't tie them tightly, just a couple of loops with a firm knot between them, enough to make walking impossible without landing flat on my face. This way, if you try to get up, you'll just fall over. It would certainly do that. Abruptly, she got up and strode straight out the front door. Don't move, she ordered, slamming the door behind her. Entirely nonplussed, I waited, stroking Ranger's ears, Googling people in my area named Joanna. I found nothing promising. After half an hour, I began to wonder if she was coming back. But just as I did, she barged back in, hauling a waxed canvas log carrier stuffed more of those wood bundles in a battered paint can. She dropped both unceremoniously beside me, produced a pair of work gloves from the log carrier, and tossed them at me. She opened the paint can, which contained not quite a liquid, but gummy blobs of something yellowish. Take some pitch, put it on the bundle, like this. She withdrew up a bit of what I now understood to be pine pitch with her gnarled fingers and deftly worked it into the ends of the sticks, which looked like she had frayed them with a knife. We got to work, of course with her constantly criticizing my clumsy method while she churned out more. Did you just go home? I asked when she had run out of faults to find. Do you live nearby? Nosy, mind your own business. Heaven knows you have plenty of it. After a moment she said, You should put that phone away when you're out wandering, girl. You never know what it will see you cannot, or what it won't. She paused. Besides, it is rude to video people's houses. I'm pretty careful not to capture any houses in my videos of trees and animals, so this was confusing. Then I remembered. I pulled off the gloves and produced my phone. I took a picture of a shack on a dirt road about a 15-minute walk from my house a couple of weeks ago. I showed her. You live here? I'll take no judgment from you, little rabbit, she snapped. That epithet was pretty rich coming from the lady who looked away half what I do, but thought better of saying so because she was also correct. Stupid, she muttered again. What are they? I asked abruptly. The Lurchers. You're not supposed to talk about them, you fool girl, she snapped. You'll call them right to you. At first I thought she wouldn't answer as she continued to work on a torch. Finally she spoke, her tone softer now. This land is old. Old. They are older than much that grows and walks upon it, creatures of the deep earth. They were guardians of the land, born of clay and the stone. The first people learned quickly not to go doing anything that would awaken them, bring them to the surface. They learned to use the fire to keep them within their subterranean realm, for they despise the heat as they do direct sunlight. But then more people came. They thought they knew better, thought they could command the land, a land older than their own kind. They thought they could tame it, change it. These fools took blades to the earth. They carved it, they gored it, they marred and scarred its face. Most did not respect or even believe in these lurchers, as you call them, did not take the proper precautions. Some did. Some realized what was happening, but they thought they could wash it away. The Candlewood Lake Project, I said. She made a noise I interpreted as assent, then continued. The project was already planned, but it needn't have been so vast, so convoluted. It needn't have swallowed Jerusalem, but for what lived in the caverns surrounding it. They spilled the river's blood upon the Lurchers. Land, she said bitterly. Just a month after they declared this monstrosity complete, right on schedule, the creatures that had been resting peacefully in the chasms of the earth arose from the depths to claim what was owed to them. Every year they come back, and they will until they deem the price has been paid for the ruined earth. Something flashed across my mind. A vision, dream-like, of the Lurchers striding out of the lake. Why do they want me? I asked. You waltzed right into their trap, you damned fool, she snapped, sharp again, brandished the torch at me furiously. I flinched, illogically thinking she might throw it at me. And then you proceeded to bait them and discuss them and photograph them and whatever else you're doing on that black brick of yours. Well, usually they take a swimmer or a boater, if they can, if they're allowed to, she murmured, eyes unfocusing. She paused, then she shook her head. But the rain last week, it kept people off the lake. This time they chose you, alone in the woods. They like the wanderers, The ones who roam and seek the small corners of the earth. Not everyone is so lucky as you, she continued. I didn't feel very lucky, but alright. I don't always get to them in time. You were lucky your friend warned me. Huh? My friend? She gestured to the eastern end of the house. You mean Beth? I said, understanding. Beth told you about me? She humphed in apparent assent. The ones who know. This time of year, they burn their fallen pine branches. They don't talk about them. They have learned. So what do I do? I asked. Can I get them to leave me alone? There is a way, she replied quietly. You will have to go face them, and you must learn to control the dreams quickly. Control the dreams? You dream of the lake. You dream of walking, offering yourself to them. The frigid blackness pressing in. How do I control it? Joanna stayed the night. And last night, too. Drew got home yesterday evening, and he's not pleased with the bossy, homeless-looking lady in our house, but isn't pushing it because he's just as lost for next steps as I am. She gave him jobs, too. Putting more torches on stakes, surrounding the house with them, cleaning out a bucket from the garage. My job was to practice, with Joanna coaching me. We turned off the lights, the only illumination coming from the flickering torches outside, and I sat on the floor, cross-legged, eyes closed. I am terrible at meditation. My mind is a busy, scattered place, and clearing it is a challenge. I was shouted at and upbraided over and over again. But eventually, after hours of effort, I was able to lower myself into the blackness of the water on command. I could feel myself drifting within its chill depths, see the endless blackness around me. I awakened with a start. I was on my feet, and my cheeks stung as Joanna treated me to another wave of verbal abuse. I realized she had slapped me awake as I stood to sleepwalk. Again! She snarled, dragging me back to the center of the room, where I sat again and tried again. 4 more tries later, I was growing frustrated, and my face hurt, red from repeated slaps. She threw her hands up and stormed off, cursing. Ranger came over and licked my face. I wrapped my arms around his neck and buried my face in his fur. I closed my eyes. I was in the lake again, but I also wasn't. The darkness surrounded me, but the darkness of Ranger's fur, the warmth of his body, was also there. I held on to it, entangling my fingers in his fur, rooting myself as I was able to look at my surroundings in both places at once. I heard them calling me, but this time I did not obey. I opened my eyes back in my house. I ran after Joanna, who I found in the dining room with Drew, assembling the bucket and torches on the table. I did it! Finally, she spat. Now do it again! I spent the rest of the night practicing, first holding on to Ranger, and then just sitting alone without using him as an anchor. I was even able to fall asleep without trying to get up. I'm ready. I'm going to finish this tonight. If it works, I'll update you tomorrow. If it doesn't, this will be my last update. Well, I'm here, obviously, and it's over, more or less. This will be my final update. Here's what happened. It was just past midnight. We got into the Subaru and made our way toward the lake. I didn't want to be there. I would have paid my life savings to be anywhere else. I could just hop on a plane, go to New Zealand. How long would it take them to cross half the earth? But no, I had to do this. Out the window, I searched the tree line for skeletal figures. Somehow I knew they were there. Halfway down the hill, I saw the first glimpse of one, pale eyes gleaming from the shadows beside the road. The head turned, watching us drive by. I looked back and saw it step into the road behind us, stride long, loping, jaw flexing. It wasn't chasing us exactly, more like keeping an eye on us, calculating our next move. Drew gripped the steering wheel, hard, knuckles white. Pay them no mind, Joanna said from the back seat. For our first stop, we drove past the police-taped gate, stopping around the corner. Per Joanna's instructions, Drew got out, withdrew a torch mounted on a long stick from the trunk, withdrew a lighter from his pocket, and ignited it. Maybe we should all go? I suggested. No, Joanna said flatly. He goes. We stay here. She handed him the empty, white plastic bucket out the open window on my side of the car. I kissed him and told him to be careful. He nodded, pale-faced, and said he loved me. Joanna tsh impatiently. He must have only been gone for 10 minutes, but it felt like years. The moment he left, Joanna and I each lit a torch and held them out the windows. As the minutes crawled by, pairs of pale orbs began to appear amid the trees on either side of the road. 1, 2, 4 now. How many are there? I asked. In all, I mean.
I don't know,
she said.
Fewer than there used to be.
We sat in silence a few minutes before the light of Drew's torch shone from around the bend, the sight flooding me with relief. He passed the bucket, filled with lake water, through the window to Joanna and handed me his torch. Did you see any? I asked anxiously. He nodded, his expression grim. 2, but they stayed in the water and didn't come close. I could just see their eyes above the water, watching me. We didn't have far to go back up to the gate, so I simply held the 2 small torches out the window in one hand. It didn't matter if they went out. We had more, and they wouldn't be too hard to relight. The dancing flames were a small comfort in the cold, dark night. I squeezed Drew's hand with my free hand, and he squeezed mine back. We parked on the side of the road beside the gate, turned the car off, and climbed out. We opened the trunk, and a few moments later, Joanna and Drew each had a staff torch, and I gripped a fresh, handheld one in one hand, the bucket of lake water in the other. The weight of the water bucket made the handle cut into my fingers uncomfortably. I felt so small.
Are you ready?
Joanna asked. I nearly shook my head, thought better of it, and nodded. My ears rang. I wondered for a moment if I would simply faint. I could go instead, Drew said, voice shaky.
No,
Joanna said.
It has to be her.
And there's no other way?
No.
Drew kissed my forehead, then pulled me into a tight, one-armed hug. I leaned against him. You've got this, love, he said. When we parted, Joanna gripped my shoulder tightly, almost painfully, and looked me hard in the eye.
When you are settled, no matter what you hear or sense around you, do not open your eyes.
I nodded again.
Do not open your eyes.
I won't. I turned toward the gate. Right on cue, a blood-chilling scream tore through the night. It was the woman's voice, the one I had heard from the mouth of the bent, elder-looking lurcher I had been calling Pharynx on that first evening up the hill. The voice begged, sobbed, shrieked in agony. I shuddered and glanced at Joanna. Her jaw was tight, free hand clenched and a fist by her side.
Go,
she ordered without looking at me. I met Drew's eyes one more time and gave it what I hoped was an encouraging smile, but probably looked more like the nausea welling up in me. Once again, I squeezed past the gate. I made my way up the hill, now dry leaves crunching under my boots. I walked slowly and deliberately, praying my usual gracelessness wouldn't send me sprawling, losing me my water or igniting the whole damned forest. The flickering golden light from the torch accompanied me in a warm orb, but after a moment I became keenly aware of a rustle of leaves and recognized the lurchers' uneven gait. I kept my gaze straight ahead, but I knew they were approaching up the drop-off to my left. The hill before me began to steepen, climbing more sharply upward. This was where the stairs had been, I realized. The lurchers seemed to suspect I was up to something. Not so easy to get to them this time. The soles of my feet ached, still healing from my Friday night somnambulance, but Joanna had smeared them with an unpleasant-smelling balm that eased the pain. 3 steps up, my toe slipped, and I gasped as I fell hard onto one knee. A bit of water sloshed out of the bucket, and I had to stop myself from breaking my fall with the torch-bearing hand. I rose painstakingly, finding my footing once again, and kept climbing around the curving incline to the crest of the hill. I reached the clearing, and found myself looking across it at Pharynx. From the tree line opposite me, its dead eyes met mine with blank, predatory hunger, its mouth gaping as ever, jaw dangling like a snapped limb, the depths of its macabre gullet glistening in the flickering torchlight, its ribcage expanding and contracting with each hoarse breath. I can't quite explain how, because its gaunt expression did not change, but something about its posture also seemed wary, hesitant. Maybe it was just that the lurcher wasn't actively staggering toward me. Over each of its shoulders peered 2 others, and as I regarded them, I knew the others were closing in from the left. No going back now. The soft rattling surrounded me on all sides, just beyond the glow of the torch. They did not scream. I was trembling. My breath came in shallow, terrified bursts that blossomed into clouds. I could feel sweat standing out on my brow despite the chill night air. It was time to make my move. I took a steadying breath, stood up taller than I felt, stepped into the center of the clearing, and set down the bucket of water in front of me. My heart beat faster. I didn't want to do this. I couldn't. I had to. I plunged the torch into the bucket of water, the frigid water chilling my hand up to the wrist as I let go of the bundle. Darkness crashed down around me, and immediately the rattling crescendo to a triumphant, deafening screech. Human screams bursting from all sides to mingle together in a gruesome, grating clamor. They were coming for me, and fast. They were just steps away. No time to think about it. Don't freeze up. As quickly as I could, I sat down, crossed my legs, closed my eyes, and released my awareness. My mind slipped back into the lake. Doing this on command, getting to the point where I could do it even with distractions, took dozens and dozens of attempts over the previous day and a half. Joanna had made me practice while she was playing music, screaming in my ear, poking me in the ribcage, whacking me with a broom, slapping my cheeks, until I could do it and remain under, no matter what was happening around me. Inky blackness surrounded me once again. I drifted in the endless dark, the pressing silence. It was almost peaceful here. Dimly, I became aware of distant sounds. I focused my hearing, not through my physical ears, but through my awareness in the water. The sounds were indeed the rattling, snarling, shrieking creatures that surrounded me, recognizable yet muffled, far away. It increased in volume, but Joanna had told me they would not touch me. I believed her. I had no choice. Suddenly, piercingly, a scream lanced through the silent waters, clear and close as a lightning strike. It was a scream I had heard before. The woman. The one that tore from Pharynx's throat as it struggled to devour me, to rip into me in the woods on that first terrible day. The cry of pain ripped out of her, cut off by the gut-wrenching ripping and tearing and wet sucking, gulping of flesh and blood. She gasped, uttered a sharp, reverberating shriek that devolved into guttering, hitching sobs. Even in the lake I could hear it, crystal clear, and the connection dragged me partially back to my physical body. I became aware that every hair was standing on end, every nerve ablaze, my heart hammering. I nearly opened my eyes, but Joanna said not to under any circumstances, to keep myself immersed in the lake, so that's what I did. I squeezed them tight, breathed deeply through my nose, concentrating on my diaphragm, and sank back into the darkness. "Do not force it," she had advised. "Relinquish your awareness of your physical experience. They have already called you to the water. You just need to let yourself see it." I focused on the water, tiny particles drifting through the blackness. I could still hear that hideous cry, that ghastly crunch and tear of human flesh. I tried not to listen. I so badly wanted to help her. I knew I could do nothing. It wasn't happening here and now, I told myself. It had already happened. It was over. A tear squeezed from one tightly closed eye. The screams fell silent. Everything fell silent. Then a great rustle of leaves. Long, loping, lurching, staggering feet all around me, moving eastward across the forest floor, back toward the lake. Dragging, dragging, dragging. As the sound faded, another sort of oppressive silence lifted. I heard insects and birds again. I breathed deeply, and suddenly I was unburdened. I opened my eyes. The bucket was there, the extinguished torch floating on the water's surface. The clearing was empty. The leaves were a tumult around me, churned into chaos by long, emaciated feet. It was dark, very dark, only illuminated by a sliver of crescent moon in the sky. But I saw sea wetness on the leaves. Lake water, I thought to myself, but I feared something else. It was darker than water. I couldn't look at it long. I didn't want to. I got to my feet and went back down the hill, somehow unconcerned about the lurchers pursuing me. Drew was there, waiting for me, his torch still alight. I ran to him, held him tightly. He returned the embrace, one-armed. He could feel the relief too, I was sure. I pulled back. "Where's Joanna?" I asked, looking up at him. His brow furrowed. "She's not still up there?" "Up where?" But I knew the answer. "She followed you up the hill," he said. "Just a few minutes after you. She told me not to leave this spot under any circumstances." I remembered the scream, the ripping and tearing. No. "We have to drive down to the lake," I said urgently. "What? Why? Please, now." As he produced the keys, I snatched them from his hand and took the driver's seat. I floored it down the hill. We screeched to a stop by the big estate, the same one where I was cornered against the shore just a few nights prior. There they were, striding into the lake. 7 in all, wading through the shallows, rippling the glassy surface. One of them, Pharynx, turned to regard me. It stood up to its calves in the water. Its hands hung close to the surface, glistening to the elbows, dark and slick in the moonlight. More dark wetness smeared its face between its eyes. "What did you do with her?" I screamed at it. It turned back to look ahead of it at two that were walking in tandem, Tantalus and another, pulling something along behind them, something that floated, horribly still on the surface of the water. Grey hair drifted like moonlight in the blackness. I dropped to the grass, eyes streaming. Pharynx glanced back once more before continuing on, and they all descended, curiously graceful as they made their way into the depths, the floating thing sliding down beneath the surface with the rest of them. The crests of two heads remained, blank eyes gleaming above the water for just a moment before they slid into the black. After we returned to our house, it was another sleepless night, my mind racked with misery and guilt rather than fear. I almost longed for the fear to return. It was better than this. I replayed every moment I had with Joanna in my mind. I did this. I let her do this. She said it would happen again next year. Would it be someone else next time? I would know, and do nothing to stop it except hide in my house behind my fire like all the other neighbors. All the other neighbors. I sat up. They know about this. Beth knows about Joanna. As soon as the sun came up, I was hammering on her door. You do Joanna, I said, unapologetic about her bleary, bed-disheveled appearance. At Joanna's name, her brows flew up. Ah, she said. Yes, I mentioned your situation to her. I take it she, stepped in for you? I blinked. Wait, how do you... She, stepped in for John a few years ago, too, when we first moved here, Beth said. John is her husband, whom I see less often and who I assumed was still sleeping. My mind reeled. This has happened before? So, you mean that she... Yes, Beth interrupted, clearly not interested in letting me say what actually happened. She shuddered, folding her arms. It was awful. But don't worry about her too much. Beth continued after a moment. It's not really your fault. I'm still not sure I agree, but I asked, has she done this for other people too? Beth nodded. I don't know how many, though. Best not to talk about it too much. Joanna's clenched fist before I went up the hill. Her references to others who have learned. Her words echoed in my mind. Every year they come back, and will until they deem the price has been paid for their ruined earth. She'll be back, Beth said. I spent the rest of the day at my tiny local library, digging in the archives. After 6 hours, I found some materials I believed to be related. A newspaper clipping of someone called Jo, a widow in her early 70s who was reported missing in late October of 1947. The clipping said her former husband, Thomas, had also been reported missing, but 19 years prior in 1928. Just weeks after the lake was declared complete. Same month. He was declared drowned after he, or some of him, turned up in the lake. He had worked on the Candlewood Project, relocating corpses from the Jerusalem graveyard. After his death, Jo became a recluse, living alone in their cabin on a dirt road atop a hill near the lake. She was said to visit select neighbors and linger by the lake in autumn. Before her disappearance, Jo had gained a reputation among more superstitious residents as an occult figure. A quote in the clipping speculated she had simply walked into the lake of her own accord. Another quote, this one from a man named Edward Brown, read, "Good riddance to that old witch." I also found a reference to a Henry Brown, a boy of 12, drowning in the lake in an article published 3 years later. Edward's son, perhaps. Not everyone is as lucky as you, Joanna had told me. I don't always get to them in time. I found more recent accounts of attempts to raise a decrepit cabin in the neighborhood. Attempts that were thwarted by nearby locals who said it was historically important to them, but would neither go near it nor approve repairs. So, if you're ever near Candlewood Lake in late October, keep your fire lit. Stay away from the water after dark, and don't follow the voices in the woods. And if you see a grouchy little old lady walking around with what looks like a fanny pack, do whatever she says. As for me, I'm hoping you won't see her. Not just for your own well-being, but because I'm getting to work. The way I see it, I have just under 1 year to figure out how to break the cycle and make sure no one, not even Joanna, has to go through this again. Close thread. And that was a story about the Lurchers by Jess Zafarris. Quite a long one. Definitely with the longest Twitter story that we've covered. It was I enjoyed it. I wish I had a little bit more pictures and videos personally, but I just felt it dragged just a little bit. Otherwise I thought it was cool. Thought it was very 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 spooks, very very perfect for like a Halloween thing. Even though this is Christmas Day, so it's like a present for all you macabre bastards out there, just like me. Well, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays for those of you who don't celebrate. We'll see you for the next one. You take care. Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes my life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastnesses of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which for innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me, that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might. Nor were there any sea-fowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness, and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian depths where no light had yet penetrated. All at once my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean horizon plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of Dor. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms, I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, they were damnably human in general outline despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awe-struck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent to the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account of the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols, and carving their own detestable likenesses on the submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind, of a day when the land shall sink, and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall find me. God, that hand! The window! The window! And that was Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. Man, I love me some H.P. Lovecraft. You got the Cthulhu mythos, you got the Elder Gods, Cosmic Horror, just all the insane stuff like insanity and madness. There's so much H.P. Lovecraft. It's a little hard to read sometimes, though, but man, it's so enjoyable. I've always enjoyed that kind of creepy, weird, mind-bending kind of stuff. I hope you have too. We'll see you for the next one.